Welcome, gentle traveler of infinite realities, to the vast expanse of existence itself, the Rick and Morty multiverse. Tonight, we drift through dimensions where science meets chaos, where infinite possibilities unfold like whispered secrets across the cosmic void. Here, every choice creates a new reality. Every portal opens to endless wonder and terror alike. As you settle into comfort, let your mind wander through these infinite worlds where nothing is certain except uncertainty itself, where every Rick carries the weight of infinite knowledge, and every Morty discovers that growing up means confronting the beautiful, terrible truth of existence. Rest now, as we explore the endless. The concept of infinite realities stretches before us like an endless ocean of possibility, each wave carrying within it every choice that could ever be made, every path that could ever be taken, every version of existence that could ever unfold. Tonight, as we drift through this cosmic tapestry, let us explore what it truly means to live in a universe where everything that can happen does happen, where every decision branches into countless new worlds, where every moment contains within it the seeds of infinite tomorrows. In the Rick and Morty multiverse, infinity is not merely a mathematical concept, but a living, breathing reality that shapes every aspect of existence. Picture, if you will, the moment when you chose what to have for breakfast this morning. In another dimension, you chose differently. In another, you skipped breakfast entirely. In yet another, breakfast as a concept never existed because evolution took a different path and humans developed entirely different nutritional needs. Each of these realities is as real and valid as the one you experience, populated by versions of yourself who are simultaneously you and not you, living lives that are recognizably yours, yet fundamentally different. The beauty and terror of infinite realities lie not in their scope, but in their implications for meaning and significance. When every possible outcome exists somewhere in the multiverse, what weight can any individual choice carry? If there is a reality where you became a renowned scientist, and another where you never learned to read, if there is a dimension where you saved the world, and another where you destroyed it, what makes your particular path through existence special or significant? Rick Sanchez, the most brilliant man in multiple universes, understands this paradox intimately. His casual dismissal of consequences stems not from cruelty, but from a profound awareness that nothing he does matters because somewhere else, a version of him is doing the opposite. When he abandons a reality after transforming its population into grotesque mutations, he does so with the knowledge that infinite other realities contain infinite other versions of those same people living happy, unaffected lives. The specific individuals he has harmed become, in his mind, merely statistical variations in an infinite dataset of possibility. This cosmic perspective fundamentally alters the nature of responsibility and attachment. Traditional moral frameworks assume scarcity, that each person is unique and irreplaceable, that each action has permanent consequences, that the damage we cause cannot be undone. But in a multiverse where every person exists in infinite variations and every mistake is balanced by infinite successes elsewhere, these assumptions crumble like sandcastles before an infinite tide. Rick's apparent sociopathy is not a character flaw, but a rational response to cosmic truth, too vast for normal human psychology to process healthily. Yet the infinite nature of the multiverse creates its own forms of meaning and significance. While it is true that every tragedy is balanced by infinite comedies elsewhere, it is equally true that every act of love and kindness ripples across infinite possibilities. When Rick chooses to protect Morty, That choice echoes across dimensions, creating infinite realities where protection triumphs over abandonment. When the Smith family chooses to stay together, despite their dysfunction, they affirm the value of connection across all possible worlds where connection might have been lost. The mathematics of infinity work in mysterious ways that transcend simple addition and subtraction. In an infinite multiverse, even events with infinitesimal probability become certainties given enough dimensional variations. There are realities where chairs are the dominant life form and humans are furniture. There are dimensions where time flows backward and effect precedes cause. There are worlds where the fundamental constants of physics are different enough that matter behaves in ways that would seem magical in our reality. Each of these impossibilities is not only possible, but inevitable in a truly infinite system. Consider the Cronenberg dimension, where Rick's love potion transforms humanity into grotesque monsters that bear no resemblance to their original forms. This reality continues to exist and evolve long after Rick and Morty abandon it, its inhabitants adapting to their new forms and creating new societies, new forms of art and culture, new ways of understanding beauty and meaning. The tragedy Rick created becomes, over time, simply another form of existence, neither more nor less valid than any other configuration of matter and consciousness. This adaptability of life and meaning in the face of infinite chaos suggests something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. No matter how radically reality is altered, beings find ways to create significance and purpose within whatever parameters they encounter. The Cronenberg humans develop their own forms of love and family. The inhabitants of post-apocalyptic dimensions create new civilizations from the ruins of the old. Life persists and finds meaning not despite the apparent randomness of infinite possibility, but because of it. The psychological impact of multiversal awareness varies dramatically among those who encounter it. For Rick, infinite realities serve as justification for emotional detachment and moral flexibility. If nothing ultimately matters because everything ultimately happens, then he is free to pursue his own interests without regard for traditional ethical constraints. But this freedom comes at the cost of genuine connection and lasting satisfaction. Every relationship becomes replaceable. Every achievement becomes trivial. Every source of meaning becomes temporary and arbitrary. For other characters, awareness of the multiverse serves different psychological functions. Morty's gradual understanding of infinite realities does not make him more callous, but more desperate to find authentic connection and meaning within the chaos. Summer's discovery that she was unplanned in most realities does not diminish her sense of self-worth, but intensifies her determination to create her own significance through choice and action. Beth's awareness that infinite versions of herself exist allows her to explore aspects of her personality and potential that might otherwise remain dormant. The show demonstrates that knowledge of infinite realities need not lead inevitably to nihilism or despair. Instead, it can serve as a backdrop against which human connections become more precious rather than less significant. When you understand that infinite versions of your loved ones exist across infinite dimensions, the particular version you happen to share your reality with becomes not less special but more miraculous. The specific configuration of circumstances that brought you together becomes a form of cosmic lottery win that defies all reasonable probability. Yet the casual ease with which characters move between realities creates its own forms of trauma and displacement. When the Smith family abandons their original dimension after the Cronenberg disaster, they must grapple with the knowledge that they are literally living someone else's life, sleeping in beds that belong to their deceased alternate selves, surrounded by people who love versions of themselves that no longer exist. This identity confusion compounds over time as multiple reality shifts blur the boundaries between authentic self and convenient replacement. The infinite nature of the multiverse also creates practical problems that challenge even Rick's technological superiority. With infinite realities available, how does one navigate to any specific destination? How does one distinguish between meaningful differences and trivial variations? How does one avoid becoming lost in the endless maze of possibility? Rick's portal technology includes built-in safeguards and navigation systems, but even these sophisticated tools can be overwhelmed by the sheer scope of infinite choice. The concept of home becomes particularly complex in an infinite multiverse. Is home the reality where you were born? The reality where you currently reside? The reality where you feel most comfortable? Or the reality that most closely matches your idealized version of existence? The Smith family's relationship with their current reality is complicated by their knowledge that it is not technically their original home, yet their emotional investment in it makes it feel more authentic than the dimension they abandoned. As we contemplate these infinite possibilities, we begin to understand that the multiverse serves as more than just a science fiction concept or storytelling device. It becomes a metaphor for the overwhelming nature of choice and consequence in any life, infinite or otherwise. Even in a single reality, we face countless decisions every day, each one potentially life-altering, each one carrying unforeseen consequences that ripple outward in ways we cannot predict or control. The comfort and terror of infinite realities mirror the comfort and terror of any existence where the future remains uncertain and the consequences of our choices remain beyond our complete understanding. Whether we live in one reality or infinite realities, we must still choose how to love, how to connect, how to create meaning from the raw materials of experience and possibility. In the gentle darkness of approaching sleep, let these infinite realities serve not as a source of anxiety about choices unmade or paths untaken, but as a reminder that in the vast cosmic ocean of possibility, the simple act of caring for one another creates ripples that extend far beyond our ability to measure or understand. Somewhere in the infinite multiverse, every kindness is amplified, every connection is strengthened, every moment of peace is extended into eternity. In the vast expanse of infinite realities, there exists perhaps no greater monument to both genius and psychological fragility than the central finite curve, a dimensional barrier that represents the most ambitious and disturbing achievement in Rick Sanchez's long career of cosmic manipulation. Tonight, as we drift through the implications of this artificial prison, we explore how even infinite intelligence can be corrupted by the deepest human insecurities, how the smartest man in multiple universes created his own cage to protect himself from truths too uncomfortable to face. The central finite curve stands as a testament to the paradox that infinite knowledge does not guarantee wisdom, that understanding the mechanics of reality does not automatically lead to healthy relationships with existence itself. Rick's construction of this dimensional barrier required him to survey infinite realities and systematically categorize them according to a single criterion: whether or not Rick Sanchez was the smartest being in that particular universe. The mathematical complexity of such an undertaking staggers the imagination, involving calculations that would challenge civilizations of scientists working for millennia. Yet Rick accomplished this feat alone, driven by psychological needs so profound that they overrode every rational consideration about the ethics and consequences of his actions. The selection process that created the central finite curve reveals the depths of Rick's fundamental insecurity about his own intellectual worth and cosmic significance. Despite possessing capabilities that border on godlike, despite being able to manipulate matter and energy at the subatomic level, despite understanding the deepest mysteries of existence, Rick could not tolerate the possibility that somewhere, in the infinite multiverse, beings existed who surpassed his achievements. This intolerance was not based on practical concerns about competition or threat, but on purely psychological terror at the prospect of intellectual humility. Consider the implications of Rick's criteria for reality selection. By isolating only those dimensions where he represented the pinnacle of intelligence, Rick condemned countless beings to existence within his carefully curated zoo of ego validation. Every Beth within the central finite curve was destined to have a father who was the smartest person she would ever encounter. Every Morty was guaranteed a grandfather whose intellectual superiority would define the boundaries of their possible development. Every Jerry was trapped in realities where his intellectual limitations would be highlighted by contrast with Rick's brilliance. The psychological architecture of the central finite curve reflects Rick's deepest pathologies magnified to cosmic proportions. His inability to form healthy relationships based on mutual respect and equality led him to create an entire multiversal prison where equality was literally impossible. Within the curve, Rick would always be the smartest person in any room, the most capable problem solver, the ultimate authority on scientific and philosophical questions. This guaranteed intellectual dominance eliminated the possibility of genuine collaboration or the kind of intellectual growth that comes from encountering minds that challenge and exceed your own capabilities. But the central finite curve was not merely an expression of narcissism. It was also a manifestation of profound existential terror. Rick's fear of intellectual inadequacy was so overwhelming that he was willing to sacrifice the freedom and potential of countless beings across infinite realities to avoid confronting it. The barrier he constructed was not just a prison for those trapped within it, but a psychological safety blanket for a genius too fragile to risk discovering his own limitations. The technological achievement required to construct and maintain the central finite curve reveals capabilities that exceed anything demonstrated elsewhere in Rick's repertoire of impossible inventions. The process required him to scan infinite realities, evaluate their contents according to complex criteria, and create a selective barrier that allowed travel only between approved dimensions while completely blocking access to the broader multiverse beyond. This barrier was not merely a wall, but a sophisticated filtering system that had to account for the constantly shifting nature of reality and the emergence of new intelligences that might challenge Rick's supremacy. The energy requirements for maintaining such a barrier across infinite realities would have been astronomical, requiring Rick to develop power sources and distribution systems that operated on scales beyond normal comprehension. The golden fluid that evil Morty eventually reveals as the curve's power source represents suffering and exploitation on an industrial scale, transforming the pain of countless Mortys into the energy needed to maintain Rick's cosmic ego shelter. Within the central finite curve, entire civilizations developed and thrived without ever knowing they were prisoners in someone else's psychological experiment. Billions of beings lived complete lives, formed families, created art, built societies, and died natural deaths, all while existing within boundaries defined not by natural law, but by Rick's emotional needs. Their achievements and failures, their hopes and fears, their moments of joy and periods of suffering were all contained within a reality that had been fundamentally altered to serve the psychological comfort of a single individual. The irony of the central finite curve lies in how it ultimately undermined the very qualities that made Rick exceptional in the first place. By eliminating intellectual competition and challenge, Rick deprived himself of the stimulation and growth that come from encountering truly superior minds. His development stagnated within his artificial paradise of guaranteed supremacy, leaving him brilliant but stunted, powerful but emotionally stunted, capable of manipulating reality but incapable of genuine self-reflection or growth. The existence of the central finite curve also created systematic oppression that extended far beyond Rick's immediate circle of influence. Every Rick within the barrier enjoyed the same guaranteed intellectual superiority, creating a multiversal civilization where the smartest beings in each reality shared similar psychological profiles and pathologies. This concentration of damaged genius led to the formation of institutions like the Citadel of Ricks, where narcissistic brilliance became the foundation for entire societies built on exploitation and emotional dysfunction. The Mortys who existed within the central finite curve were particularly victimized by Rick's architectural choices. In every reality within the barrier, Mortys were guaranteed to encounter grandfathers whose intellectual capabilities so vastly exceeded their own that healthy development became nearly impossible. The psychological damage inflicted by constant exposure to beings who viewed them as intellectually inferior created trauma patterns that repeated across infinite dimensions, turning what should have been nurturing family relationships into exercises in systematic emotional abuse. The central finite curve's impact on other family members reveals how individual psychological pathology can distort entire social systems when given enough power and scope. Beths within the curve were systematically deprived of the opportunity to encounter intellectual equals who might have provided healthier models for relationships and personal development. Jerrys found themselves trapped in realities where their limitations were highlighted by contrast with beings whose capabilities approached the divine. Summer grew up in dimensions where her grandfather's godlike abilities made normal human achievement seem trivial by comparison. The scientific discoveries and technological innovations that occurred within the central finite curve were simultaneously impressive and constrained by the artificial limitations Rick had imposed. While Ricks within the barrier achieved remarkable feats of invention and discovery, they did so within a context that eliminated the most challenging problems and the most stimulating intellectual competition. Their achievements, while significant by normal standards, were ultimately hollow because they occurred within a rigged system designed to guarantee success. The maintenance of the central finite curve required not just technological sophistication, but also moral blindness on a scale that defies normal human understanding. Rick had to continuously monitor infinite realities to ensure that no being within the barrier developed intelligence that exceeded his own, presumably eliminating or relocating any entity that approached his level of capability. This ongoing surveillance and intervention represented a form of intellectual totalitarianism that controlled the development of consciousness itself across countless worlds. The psychological cost of maintaining the central finite curve extended beyond its impact on Rick's development to affect his fundamental relationship with reality itself. Living within a system designed to validate his superiority made it increasingly difficult for him to distinguish between genuine achievement and artificial validation. His accomplishments within the curve were tainted by the knowledge that they occurred within a context specifically designed to ensure his success, leading to a form of existential uncertainty that no amount of external validation could resolve. Evil Morty's discovery of the central finite curve's existence and his subsequent plan to destroy it represented the ultimate rebellion against Rick's cosmic narcissism. A being who had developed within Rick's carefully controlled system but had somehow transcended its psychological limitations, Evil Morty embodied the possibility that intelligence and capability could exist without the pathological need for superiority that defined Rick's relationship with existence. The revelation of the central finite curve's true nature forced Rick to confront the uncomfortable truth that his entire identity had been built on a foundation of artificial validation and systematic oppression. The barriers he had constructed to protect his ego had simultaneously prevented him from achieving the kind of authentic growth and development that might have addressed the underlying insecurities that made the barrier seem necessary in the first place. The destruction of the central finite curve by evil Morty represented not just the collapse of a technological system, but the shattering of the psychological framework that had organized Rick's existence for decades. Without the guarantee of intellectual superiority, Rick was forced to confront the possibility of encountering beings who exceeded his capabilities, a prospect so terrifying that he had restructured the multiverse itself to avoid it. As the central finite curve collapsed, it took with it not just a dimensional barrier, but an entire way of understanding existence and significance. The infinite realities beyond the curve contained possibilities that Rick had been too frightened to explore, beings whose achievements might have humbled him, discoveries that might have revealed the limitations of his understanding. The prison he had built to protect his ego had also protected him from the growth that comes only through genuine challenge and the possibility of failure. In the gentle darkness of sleep, let us remember that the central finite curve serves as more than just a science fiction concept, but as a parable about the ways that fear can corrupt even the greatest gifts. When intelligence is used to avoid growth rather than pursue it, when power is employed to eliminate challenge rather than embrace it, when knowledge serves to justify isolation rather than foster connection, even infinite capability becomes a prison of our own making. The collapse of Rick's artificial paradise reminds us that authentic worth cannot be built on the systematic diminishment of others, that genuine confidence cannot be sustained through the elimination of competition, and that true wisdom comes not from being the smartest person in a carefully controlled environment, but from remaining open to learning from every being we encounter, regardless of their apparent limitations or our perceived superiority. The portal gun represents perhaps the most transformative technology ever created, a device so deceptively simple in appearance, yet so profound in its implications, that it fundamentally alters the nature of existence itself for anyone who wields it. Tonight, as we drift through the mechanics and meaning of interdimensional travel, we explore how the ability to step between realities changes not just where you can go, but who you can become, how you understand consequence, and what it means to call any place home. In Rick's weathered hands, the portal gun appears almost mundane, a metallic device roughly the size of a conventional firearm, its crystalline core glowing with the soft blue-green luminescence of concentrated portal fluid. Yet this unassuming tool contains within it the power to breach the fundamental barriers that separate one reality from another, to tear holes in the fabric of space-time itself with the casual ease of opening a door. The technology that enables such impossible feats operates on principles that transcend conventional physics, manipulating quantum fields and dimensional membranes in ways that would require entire civilizations to understand. Yet, Rick has compressed this cosmic capability into something he can carry in his lab coat pocket. The portal fluid that powers these devices represents one of the most precious and dangerous substances in the multiverse, a crystalline compound that exists in a state of controlled dimensional instability. Each drop contains enough concentrated energy to power a small city, yet Rick uses it with the casual indifference of someone burning gasoline in a car engine. The fluid must be harvested from specific dimensional sources, refined through processes that involve manipulating matter at the subatomic level, and stored in containment systems that prevent it from spontaneously creating uncontrolled dimensional rifts. The physics of portal creation involve calculations that stretch the boundaries of mathematical possibility, requiring real-time analysis of dimensional coordinates, quantum state alignments, and temporal synchronization factors that exist in constant flux across infinite realities. Each portal must account for differences in physical laws between dimensions, ensuring that travelers do not find themselves subjected to gravitational fields, atmospheric conditions, or fundamental forces that would instantly destroy their molecular structure upon arrival. Rick's mastery of portal technology extends far beyond simple point-to-point travel between known destinations. He has developed techniques for dimensional scanning that allow him to identify realities with specific characteristics, navigation systems that can locate dimensions based on abstract criteria, and stabilization protocols that keep portals open for extended periods without catastrophic energy drain. His portal gun can create temporary rifts for quick escapes, permanent gateways for establishing interdimensional infrastructure, and even weaponized portals that redirect attacks or transport enemies to hostile environments. The psychological impact of possessing portal technology cannot be understated, as it fundamentally alters the wielder's relationship with consequence, commitment, and connection. When any problem can potentially be solved by simply traveling to a dimension where it does not exist, the motivation to work through difficulties or invest in long-term solutions diminishes dramatically. Why repair a broken relationship when you can find a reality where it was never damaged? Why face the consequences of your actions when you can relocate to a dimension where those actions never occurred? This casual relationship with dimensional abandonment becomes evident in how Rick treats entire realities as disposable resources rather than inhabited worlds deserving of respect and consideration. When his love potion transforms humanity into grotesque mutations, his solution is not to develop a cure, but to relocate to a dimension where the disaster never happened. When his actions destabilize a reality beyond repair, he simply moves to another one where he can continue his activities without interruption. The ease of interdimensional travel creates its own forms of addiction and dependency, as the wielder becomes increasingly unable to tolerate limitations, discomfort, or any situation that cannot be immediately resolved through reality hopping. Rick's frustration with conventional problem-solving methods reflects his reliance on portal technology as a universal solution to every difficulty, leading to emotional atrophy in areas that require patience, compromise, or genuine effort to address. Portal fluid scarcity adds layers of complexity and vulnerability to what might otherwise seem like unlimited freedom of movement. The rarity of the substance means that even Rick must carefully manage his interdimensional activities, rationing his reality hopping to conserve resources for truly essential travel. This limitation serves as one of the few checks on his otherwise godlike mobility, occasionally forcing him to remain in a single reality long enough to develop genuine investment in its outcomes. The interdimensional customs and bureaucracies that have developed around portal technology reveal how even the most revolutionary capabilities eventually become subject to regulation and systematization. Various dimensional authorities attempt to monitor and control interdimensional traffic, creating checkpoint systems, taxation schemes, and licensing requirements that transform the cosmic freedom of reality hopping into another form of mundane bureaucratic process. Different realities possess varying degrees of technological sophistication regarding portal technology, creating complex power dynamics between dimensions that have mastered interdimensional travel and those that remain isolated within single realities. Rick's technological superiority allows him to exploit less advanced dimensions with impunity, while avoiding realities where portal technology is more highly developed and regulated. The weaponization potential of portal technology extends far beyond simple transportation, as skilled users can redirect attacks through dimensional rifts, transport enemies into hostile environments, or create portal-based traps that exploit dimensional physics for tactical advantage. Rick's combat applications of portal technology demonstrate creativity that borders on the artistic, using dimensional rifts to solve problems that would be impossible to address through conventional means. The social and cultural implications of widespread portal technology adoption would be staggering, potentially eliminating concepts like immigration, resource scarcity, and geographic limitation, while creating new forms of inequality based on dimensional access and navigation capability. Societies with portal technology would face unprecedented challenges in maintaining cultural identity, legal jurisdiction, and economic stability, when citizens could literally step outside reality to avoid unwanted obligations or consequences. Portal technology also creates profound questions about identity and continuity when travel between dimensions becomes as casual as walking between rooms. If you can visit a reality where you made different life choices, interact with alternate versions of your friends and family, or even replace your current existence with a more desirable alternative from another dimension, what defines the authentic you versus convenient substitutes? The environmental and ecological impact of frequent portal usage remains largely unexplored, but potentially catastrophic, as each dimensional breach could theoretically destabilize local space-time, introduce invasive species or substances from foreign realities, or create long-term damage to the dimensional barriers that separate realities. Rick's casual use of portal technology shows little regard for such concerns, prioritizing immediate convenience over long-term dimensional stability. The learning curve for portal technology is steep and dangerous, requiring users to develop not just technical proficiency, but also the judgment necessary to navigate infinite realities without becoming lost, corrupted, or destroyed by exposure to hostile environments. The combination of godlike power with human psychology creates inevitable problems, as wielders struggle to maintain perspective and ethical behavior when faced with infinite alternatives and minimal consequences for their actions. Portal gun maintenance and repair require access to specialized materials and knowledge that few beings possess, making users dependent on suppliers and repair services that may exist only in specific dimensions or under particular conditions. This dependency creates vulnerabilities that can be exploited by enemies or used as leverage by interdimensional authorities seeking to control portal technology distribution. The democratization of portal technology through devices like Rick's portal guns represents a fundamental shift in cosmic power dynamics, potentially allowing individuals to achieve capabilities that previously required entire civilizations to develop and maintain. This democratization carries both liberation and danger, as it places universe-altering power in the hands of beings who may lack the wisdom or stability to use it responsibly. Alternative methods of interdimensional travel shown throughout the series demonstrate that portal technology, while highly advanced, is not the only means of breaching dimensional barriers. Natural phenomena, advanced alien technologies, and even consciousness-based techniques can facilitate travel between realities, suggesting that the multiverse itself may be more permeable and accessible than portal technology alone would indicate. The philosophical implications of easy reality hopping extend beyond practical concerns to challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence, choice, and meaning. If every decision creates a new reality, and every reality can be accessed with sufficient technology, traditional concepts of fate, destiny, and consequence lose much of their power to organize human experience and motivation. Portal technology serves as both liberation and prison, offering infinite freedom while potentially trapping users in cycles of endless escapism that prevent genuine growth connection, or satisfaction. The ability to always find a better alternative becomes a barrier to appreciating and investing in current circumstances, creating a form of existential restlessness that no amount of dimensional travel can ultimately satisfy. As we contemplate the implications of such powerful technology, we begin to understand that portal guns represent more than just advanced transportation devices. They become symbols of humanity's eternal desire to transcend limitations and explore possibilities, while simultaneously illustrating the dangers that come with power that exceeds wisdom. In the gentle darkness of sleep, let us remember that while the ability to step between realities might seem like the ultimate freedom, the deepest form of liberation often comes from learning to find meaning and satisfaction within whatever reality we happen to inhabit, appreciating the particular configuration of circumstances that makes our current existence unique among infinite alternatives. The portal gun reminds us that technology, no matter how advanced, cannot solve the fundamental human challenges of learning to love, to grow, to connect authentically with others, and to find purpose within the constraints and possibilities of our current situation. Even with access to infinite realities, the search for meaning ultimately returns us to the simple question of how we choose to exist within whatever world we find ourselves inhabiting. The Citadel of Rix stands as perhaps the most ambitious and psychologically revealing social experiment in the history of infinite realities, a massive space station constructed by and for beings who represent the smartest individuals in their respective universes, yet who have come together to create a society that mirrors and magnifies every human flaw and dysfunction imaginable. Tonight, as we drift through the corridors and complexities of this civilization of narcissists, we explore how even infinite intelligence cannot overcome the fundamental human need for connection, validation, and meaning, and how the attempt to build utopia from superiority complexes inevitably creates its own forms of oppression and despair. The formation of the Citadel began as a practical response to the threat posed by Rick C-137's multiversal killing spree, when alternate versions of Rick Sanchez, across countless dimensions, recognized that their intellectual superiority was not sufficient protection against a version of themselves who had abandoned all moral constraints in pursuit of revenge. The alliance that emerged from this existential crisis was born not from genuine cooperation or shared values, but from mutual recognition that their individual arrogance and isolation made them vulnerable to threats they could not face. Alone, the architectural magnificence of the Citadel reflects both the incredible capabilities of its builders and their fundamental inability to create anything that transcends their own psychological limitations. The structure itself defies conventional physics, a massive ring-shaped station that exists partially within normal space-time and partially within dimensional rifts, allowing it to serve as a nexus point for travel between realities, while remaining mobile enough to avoid detection by hostile forces. Its gleaming surfaces and impossible geometries speak to the aesthetic sensibilities of beings who understand matter manipulation at the quantum level, yet its social spaces reveal the emotional impoverishment of those who designed them. The government structure that developed within the Citadel demonstrates how even the most intelligent beings can create political systems that replicate the worst aspects of conventional democracy while adding new layers of dysfunction unique to their particular form of collective narcissism. The presidential elections held on the Citadel become exercises in manipulation and demagoguery that would be familiar to any student of human political history, yet they are conducted by beings whose intellectual capabilities should theoretically allow them to transcend such primitive forms of social organization. The economic foundation of Citadel society rests upon a form of slavery so systematic and comprehensive that it encompasses not just individual exploitation, but the commodification of entire categories of beings based on their dimensional origin and genetic relationship to the ruling class. Mortys within the Citadel exist as a permanent underclass, their labor exploited, their autonomy denied, their very existence justified only in terms of their utility to their Rick counterparts. This economic structure reveals how intelligence without empathy leads inevitably to the rationalization of oppression on industrial scales. The class system that emerged within the Citadel creates hierarchies that transcend simple economic inequality to encompass fundamental questions of personhood and dignity. Ricks occupy the dominant position not through achievement or merit, but through the accident of their intellectual capabilities and dimensional origin. Their status as the smartest beings in their respective realities becomes the foundation for claims to superiority that justify every form of exploitation and abuse they choose to inflict upon those they consider lesser beings. The Morty underclass represents perhaps the most tragic aspect of Citadel society, as these beings are systematically denied the opportunity to develop their potential or express their agency in meaningful ways. Their treatment ranges from benign neglect to outright abuse, with individual mortars viewed as interchangeable resources rather than unique individuals with their own hopes, dreams, and capabilities. The Morty market that operates within the Citadel reduces the buying and selling of conscious beings to a casual commercial transaction, revealing the depths of dehumanization that supposedly enlightened beings can achieve when their intelligence is not tempered by genuine moral development. The social stratification within the Citadel extends beyond the simple Rick-Morty divide to encompass numerous subcategories and specializations that create complex webs of privilege and oppression. Simple Ricks, who have chosen family happiness over scientific achievement, occupy a middle ground between the ruling scientist class and the Morty underclass. Yet their contentment is viewed with suspicion and contempt by Ricks, who have sacrificed emotional fulfillment for intellectual advancement. Worker Ricks, who perform specialized functions within Citadel society, find themselves subject to forms of discrimination and exploitation that mirror the treatment of working classes in conventional societies. The cultural products that emerge from Citadel society reflect the psychological poverty of its creators, with entertainment and art that celebrates cynicism, superiority, and emotional detachment, while mocking genuine connection and vulnerability as weaknesses to be overcome, rather than strengths to be cultivated. The Simple Rick's wafer manufacturing facility represents the commodification of authentic happiness, transforming genuine family joy into a consumer product that can be purchased and consumed by beings who have sacrificed their own capacity for such experiences. The law enforcement and justice systems within the Citadel operate according to principles that prioritize the maintenance of existing power structures over any genuine pursuit of fairness or equality. Rick guards and security forces exist primarily to protect the privileges of the ruling class, while suppressing any attempts at resistance or reform from the exploited underclass. The arbitrary nature of Citadel justice reflects the assumption that intelligence alone is sufficient qualification for making decisions about life, death, and freedom for other conscious beings. The technological infrastructure that supports Citadel society demonstrates capabilities that border on the miraculous, yet these achievements are undermined by their application toward maintaining systems of oppression and exploitation rather than promoting genuine flourishing for all inhabitants. Advanced manufacturing systems produce consumer goods and luxury items for the Rick population, while providing only basic subsistence for Mortys. Medical technology that could theoretically eliminate suffering and extend life indefinitely is rationed according to class status rather than need or merit. The various Rick factions that compete for influence within Citadel society reveal how even beings with identical intellectual capabilities can develop radically different philosophical and political orientations based on their particular responses to trauma, power, and responsibility. Conservative Ricks who seek to preserve traditional hierarchies clash with progressive Ricks who advocate for modest reforms, while radical Ricks pursue revolutionary changes that often involve even greater levels of violence and oppression than the systems they seek to replace. The educational institutions within the Citadel serve primarily to indoctrinate young Ricks into the ideological frameworks that justify the existing social order, while providing Mortys with only enough education to make them useful workers rather than independent thinkers capable of challenging their exploitation. The curriculum emphasizes technical competence and intellectual achievement, while systematically neglecting emotional intelligence, ethical reasoning, and the kind of wisdom that comes from genuine engagement with suffering and limitation. The religious and philosophical movements that develop within Citadel society attempt to provide meaning and purpose for beings whose intellectual capabilities have made traditional forms of faith and spirituality seem primitive and irrelevant. Yet these movements often devolve into pseudo-intellectual exercises in nihilism and superiority that provide intellectual stimulation without genuine transcendence or connection to purposes larger than individual ego. Gratification. The mental health crisis that plagues Citadel society manifests in epidemic levels of depression, addiction, and violence that no amount of technological advancement can adequately address. The isolation and emotional impoverishment that result from building identity entirely around intellectual superiority create psychological wounds that resist healing through conventional therapeutic approaches. The high rates of suicide, domestic violence, and antisocial behavior among the Rick population demonstrate how intelligence without emotional development leads inevitably to forms of suffering that transcend material circumstances. The treatment of dissent and opposition within Citadel society reveals the authoritarian tendencies that emerge when beings who are accustomed to intellectual dominance encounter challenges to their worldview or authority. Political protesters, labor organizers, and civil rights advocates face persecution that ranges from social ostracism to imprisonment to execution, with the justification that their lesser intelligence disqualifies them from participating in decisions about social organization and resource distribution. The corruption that permeates every level of Citadel society reflects the inevitable consequence of concentrating power among beings who believe their intellectual superiority exempts them from normal, moral constraints and accountability. Measures, bribery, extortion, and abuse of authority become standard operating procedures rather than exceptional violations of ethical norms, creating cycles of exploitation that corrupt even well-intentioned individuals who attempt to work within the system. The foreign policy that the Citadel pursues toward other dimensional civilizations demonstrates how collective narcissism scales up to create forms of imperialism and cultural chauvinism that justify exploitation and domination of societies that lack comparable technological capabilities. The assumption that intellectual superiority translates into moral authority leads to interventions in other realities that typically result in more suffering than they alleviate, yet these failures are rationalized as necessary costs of bringing enlightenment to primitive civilizations. The ultimate instability of Citadel civilization becomes apparent in its vulnerability to threats from within its own population, as beings like evil Morty demonstrate that intelligence and strategic thinking are not the exclusive provinces of the Rick class. The systematic oppression and exploitation that defines Citadel society create the very conditions that give rise to revolutionary movements capable of destroying the entire structure from within. Yet the ruling class remains blind to these dangers because their superiority complex prevents them from recognizing the capabilities and potential of those they exploit. The collapse of the Citadel under evil Morty's assault reveals how civilizations, built on foundations of systematic oppression, carry within them the seeds of their own destruction, as the contradictions and injustices that enable short-term stability eventually generate forces that cannot be contained or controlled through conventional means. The burning wreckage of Rick's civilization serves as a monument to the limitations of intelligence without wisdom, power without responsibility, and achievement without genuine connection to purposes larger than individual ego gratification. In the gentle darkness of approaching sleep, let us remember that the Citadel of Rick serves as more than just a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and privilege, but as a mirror that reflects our own tendencies towards superiority, exclusion, and the rationalization of systems that benefit us at the expense of others. Even in our own single reality, we face the temptation to use whatever advantages we possess to justify treating others as less worthy of respect, dignity, and opportunity. The tragedy of the Citadel reminds us that true civilization cannot be built on foundations of exploitation and oppression, no matter how sophisticated the technology or how impressive the intellectual achievements of those in power. The highest forms of intelligence must be tempered by wisdom, empathy, and genuine commitment to the flourishing of all conscious beings, not just those who happen to share our particular advantages or capabilities. The infinite spectrum of Morty Smith across countless realities reveals perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of multiversal existence, as we witness countless variations of a fundamentally innocent soul subjected to trauma, exploitation, and corruption that transforms natural curiosity and kindness into resignation, cynicism, and sometimes outright malevolence. Tonight, as we drift through the endless variations of this archetypal grandson, we explore how vulnerability becomes weaponized, how innocence serves as both shield and target, and how the very qualities that make Mortys precious also make them perfect victims for those who mistake intelligence for wisdom. The baseline Morty template represents a constellation of characteristics that remain remarkably consistent across dimensional variations. Intellectual curiosity, tempered by social anxiety, moral intuition undermined by lack of confidence, genuine compassion complicated by adolescent awkwardness, and an underlying resilience that allows him to survive experiences that would break stronger personalities. These qualities make Morty simultaneously endearing and exploitable, as his natural empathy and desire to help others creates countless opportunities for manipulation by those who understand his psychological vulnerabilities. The relationship between Rick and Morty across infinite realities demonstrates how even the most loving connections can become corrupted when they are built on fundamental inequalities of power, knowledge, and emotional maturity. Rick's intellectual superiority creates a dynamic where Morty's natural development is continuously interrupted by exposure to cosmic horrors, philosophical concepts, and moral complexities that no adolescent mind should be expected to process successfully. The adventures that Rick frames as educational opportunities are often thinly disguised, forms of psychological warfare that gradually erode Morty's capacity for normal emotional development. Yet within this pattern of exploitation and trauma, we also see evidence of genuine affection and mutual dependency that transcends the simple power dynamic between genius and innocent. Rick's need for Morty's emotional grounding and moral perspective creates a form of symbiosis, where each character provides something essential that the other lacks. Morty's humanity serves as an anchor that prevents Rick from drifting completely into nihilistic detachment, while Rick's protection and guidance offer Morty opportunities for growth and adventure that would otherwise be impossible within the constraints of normal adolescent experience. The development of confidence and competence in various Mortys across different realities reveals the tremendous potential that exists within this seemingly helpless character when he is allowed to grow without constant psychological manipulation and trauma. In dimensions where Rick dies early or never appears, Mortys often develop into capable, confident individuals who retain their fundamental kindness, while gaining the skills and knowledge necessary to navigate complex challenges independently. These alternate Mortys demonstrate that the helplessness and anxiety we associate with the character are not inherent traits, but rather responses to specific environmental pressures. Evil Morty represents the most extreme evolution of this potential, embodying what happens when a Morty's natural intelligence and moral intuition are combined with Rick-level strategic thinking and complete abandonment of the empathy that normally constrains his actions. His transformation from victim to victimizer illustrates how prolonged exposure to systematic abuse can corrupt even the most fundamentally decent personalities, turning protective instincts into predatory ones and transforming the desire for safety into the need for control and dominance over others. The existence of evil Morty also raises disturbing questions about the nature of the Rick-Morty relationship itself, suggesting that the dynamic we witness in the main timeline may not be as unique or special as it appears. If a Morty can develop the capabilities necessary to manipulate and ultimately destroy Rick's civilization, then perhaps the intellectual gap between Rick's and Morty's is not as insurmountable as it seems, and Rick's apparent superiority may depend more on Morty's self-imposed limitations than on any genuine intellectual advantage. The Mortys who never encounter their Rick grandfathers develop along entirely different trajectories that reveal how much of Morty's familiar anxiety and incompetence stems from his specific relationship with Rick, rather than any inherent limitations. These alternate Mortys often pursue normal educational and career paths, form healthy relationships with peers and family members, and develop the kind of gradual confidence that comes from facing age-appropriate challenges rather than cosmic horrors that dwarf human comprehension. The concept of Morty waves, the psychic static that Mortys supposedly generate to mask Rick's genius from interdimensional authorities, reveals how even Rick's protective instincts toward his grandson are filtered through utilitarian calculations that reduce Morty to a useful tool rather than a person deserving of protection for his own sake. This supposed scientific necessity provides Rick with a rationalization for exposing Morty to dangers and traumas that would otherwise be difficult to justify, transforming genuine care into a form of exploitation disguised as mutual benefit. The gradual corruption of innocence that we witness in the main timeline Morty reflects a process that occurs across countless realities where Ricks expose their grandsons to experiences that fundamentally alter their understanding of existence, morality, and human nature. Each adventure chips away at Morty's natural optimism and faith in the goodness of others, replacing naive hope with cynical wisdom that provides survival skills at the cost of the very qualities that made him worth protecting in the first place. The various specialized Mortys that appear throughout the series, including Cop Morty, Campaign Manager Morty, and the Morty Assassins, demonstrate how the basic Morty template can be shaped by different environmental pressures and opportunities into radically different personality configurations. These variations suggest that the helpless, anxious Morty we know best may represent just one possible outcome among many, rather than the inevitable result of the Rick-Morty relationship. The Mortys who become Ricks represent perhaps the most tragic evolution within the spectrum, as they demonstrate how the cycle of trauma and exploitation perpetuates itself across generations and dimensions. These transformed beings retain enough of their original Morty nature to understand the pain they inflict on their own grandsons, yet they have become so damaged by their experiences that they continue the patterns of abuse that shape their own development, creating endless cycles of corruption that span infinite realities. The treatment of Mortys within the Citadel reveals how quickly beings can become dehumanized when they are viewed primarily in terms of their utility to others rather than their intrinsic worth as conscious individuals. The casual buying and selling of Mortys, their assignment to various RICs based on compatibility algorithms, and their systematic exclusion from meaningful participation in Citadel society all reflect how even supposedly enlightened civilizations can institutionalize forms of oppression that reduce entire categories of beings to commodities. The resilience that allows Mortys to survive repeated exposure to cosmic horrors, family dysfunction, and systematic exploitation also becomes a source of their continued victimization, as their ability to adapt and recover from trauma is interpreted as evidence that such experiences are not genuinely harmful. Rick's casual dismissal of Morty's emotional distress often rests on the assumption that Morty's resilience means he does not require the same consideration and protection that would be extended to more fragile personalities. The question of whether Mortys are truly essential to Rick's functioning or merely convenient accessories reflects deeper uncertainties about the nature of human connection and the degree to which our relationships with others serve genuine emotional needs versus psychological habits and rationalizations. Rick's inability to function effectively without Morty's presence suggests either genuine dependency or elaborate self-deception about his own emotional requirements. The various forms of rebellion and resistance that different Mortys display across the multiverse range from passive-aggressive sabotage to outright revolution, demonstrating that even the most exploited and oppressed beings retain the capacity for agency and self-determination when pushed beyond their breaking points. These acts of defiance reveal that Morty's apparent compliance and helplessness often mask deeper currents of resentment and strategic thinking that become visible only when circumstances create opportunities for expression. The relationship between different Mortys and their respective family members varies dramatically across realities, with some developing healthy, supportive connections to parents and siblings, while others remain trapped in dysfunctional dynamics that mirror and amplify the problems created by Rick's presence. These variations suggest that family dysfunction is not inevitable, but rather the result of specific choices and circumstances that could potentially be addressed through different approaches to conflict resolution and emotional support. The potential for growth and development that exists within every Morty, regardless of the trauma and exploitation he has experienced, represents one of the most hopeful aspects of the character's multiversal presence. Even Mortys who have been subjected to years of abuse and manipulation retain the capacity for healing, growth, and positive contribution to the world when they are provided with appropriate support and opportunities for healthy development. The various ways that different Mortys process and respond to the knowledge of infinite realities reflects the fundamental human challenge of finding meaning and purpose in the face of cosmic insignificance. Some become paralyzed by the vastness of possibility. Others find liberation in the recognition that infinite alternatives exist, while still others use multiversal awareness as justification for nihilistic behavior that mirrors Rick's own moral flexibility. The Mortys, who manage to maintain their essential kindness and empathy despite prolonged exposure to cosmic horrors and systematic exploitation, represent perhaps the most heroic figures in the entire multiverse, as they demonstrate that decency and compassion can survive even the most corrupting influences when they are rooted deeply enough in genuine love for others and commitment to principles larger than self-preservation. As we drift through the infinite spectrum of Morty possibilities, we begin to understand that his character serves as more than just a foil for Rick's cynicism or a convenient adventure companion for interdimensional travel. Morty represents the part of ourselves that remains capable of growth, wonder, and genuine connection despite exposure to experiences that should theoretically destroy our capacity for hope and trust in the goodness of existence. In the gentle darkness of approaching sleep, let us remember that every Morty across infinite realities carries within him the potential for both corruption and redemption, the capacity for both victimization and heroism, the possibility of both surrender and resistance. The infinite spectrum of his existence reminds us that no matter how damaged we may become through our encounters with cruelty and indifference, we retain the fundamental choice of how to respond to suffering, whether to perpetuate the cycles that have harmed us or to break them through conscious commitment to treating others with the compassion and respect we ourselves have been denied. The vulnerability that makes Morty's perfect victims also makes them perfect heroes when they choose to use their experiences of suffering to develop greater empathy for others rather than greater cynicism about the possibility of genuine, human connection and meaningful existence within whatever reality they happen to inhabit. The trail of destruction that Rick Sanchez leaves in his wake across countless realities stands as a monument to the catastrophic consequences of wielding godlike power without corresponding wisdom, compassion, or accountability. Tonight, as we drift through the wreckage of abandoned worlds and explore the aftermath of casual interdimensional devastation, we witness how easily entire civilizations can be discarded when they become inconvenient, and how the survivors of Rick's experiments must rebuild meaning and hope from the ashes of everything they once knew. The Cronenberg disaster represents perhaps the most vivid example of how Rick's approach to problem-solving creates exponentially worse problems than the original issue he sought to address. What began as a simple request from Morty for help with teenage romance escalated through Rick's characteristic over-engineering and casual disregard for safety protocols into a global pandemic that transformed the entire human population into grotesque genetic mutations bearing no resemblance to their original forms. The love potion that was meant to make one girl temporarily attracted to Morty instead created a biologically contagious obsession that spread through airborne transmission, turning every human being on Earth into a slavering monster whose sole purpose was the pursuit and capture of one terrified teenage boy. The speed with which this transformation occurred reveals the fragility of human civilization and the thin veneer of stability that separates normal existence from absolute chaos. Within hours, organized society collapsed as infected individuals abandoned their jobs, families, and responsibilities to join the growing horde, pursuing Morty through streets that quickly became battlegrounds between the transformed and the not yet transformed. Schools, hospitals, government buildings, and emergency services all crumbled as their personnel succumbed to the spreading infection, leaving no institutional framework capable of mounting an organized response to the crisis. Rick's solution to the love potion disaster demonstrates his fundamental inability to accept responsibility for problems he creates, as he compounds the original catastrophe with additional genetic modifications that transform the love-crazed humans into even more horrific mutations that can never be returned to their original forms. The antidote he develops addresses only the behavioral symptoms of the infection rather than its underlying biological causes, creating creatures that are no longer obsessed with Morty, but are also no longer recognizably human in any meaningful sense. The psychological impact of witnessing this transformation unfold in real time traumatizes not just Morty, who must live with the knowledge that his simple request for romantic help destroyed an entire world, but also the family members who survive to see their reality become uninhabitable. The casual way that Rick dismisses the suffering of billions of transformed beings reveals how multiversal awareness has severed his connection to normal human empathy, allowing him to view entire populations as acceptable losses in his personal experiments, rather than conscious individuals deserving of consideration and protection. The decision to abandon the Cronenberg reality, rather than attempt to develop genuine cures or solutions, reflects Rick's characteristic preference for escape over accountability, but it also forces the Smith family to confront the existential horror of literally living someone else's life. Their arrival in a dimension where their alternate selves have just died in an unrelated accident creates layers of identity, confusion, and psychological displacement that no amount of dimensional similarity can fully resolve, as they must sleep in beds that belong to their deceased counterparts and maintain relationships with people who love versions of themselves that no longer exist. The survivors left behind in the Cronenberg dimension provide a fascinating study in adaptation and resilience, as they develop new forms of society and culture appropriate to their transformed biological status, while retaining enough of their original humanity to create meaningful connections and purposeful existence despite their grotesque appearance. Jerry and Beth's relationship actually improves in the post-apocalyptic environment as the external pressures and shared challenges of survival create opportunities for cooperation and mutual support that were absent in their previous domestic routine. The evolution of Cronenberg society over time reveals the remarkable capacity of consciousness to create meaning and value within even the most horrific circumstances, as the transformed humans develop their own forms of art, entertainment, and social organization that reflect their new biological reality, while honoring whatever remains of their original human nature. Their ability to find happiness and fulfillment within their mutated forms challenges Rick's assumption that his abandonment of the reality was necessary or justified, suggesting that adaptation and acceptance might have been more ethical responses than escape and replacement. The environmental and ecological consequences of Rick's various experiments extend far beyond the immediate transformation of human populations to encompass fundamental alterations in planetary systems, atmospheric composition, and biological diversity that create cascading effects lasting for generations after Rick's departure. Worlds where his technology has destabilized local physics suffer from unpredictable gravitational anomalies, temporal distortions, and energy fluctuations that make normal technological development impossible, while creating new forms of natural disaster that no amount of preparation can adequately address. The realities where Rick's weapons testing has gone awry become cautionary tales about the dangers of developing destructive capabilities without corresponding advances in wisdom and restraint. Planets scarred by his experiments with exotic matter and dimensional weapons bear permanent wounds that affect weather patterns, geological stability, and the fundamental structure of space-time itself, creating environments where survival requires constant adaptation to unpredictable and often impossible conditions. The psychological trauma inflicted on populations who witness but survive Rick's disasters creates lasting cultural changes that shape how entire civilizations understand their relationship with technology, science, and the pursuit of knowledge. Worlds that have experienced Rick-caused catastrophes often develop religious or philosophical movements centered around the rejection of advanced science, creating societies that deliberately limit their technological development to avoid triggering similar disasters through their own research and experimentation. The question of whether Rick is morally responsible for disasters that result from unintended consequences versus deliberate negligence becomes increasingly complex as we examine the pattern of his experimental methodology and safety protocols. While he rarely sets out to destroy entire worlds, his casual disregard for testing procedures, containment protocols, and risk assessment creates conditions where catastrophic failures become statistically inevitable rather than genuinely accidental. The abandoned realities serve as laboratories for studying how life reasserts itself in the aftermath of seemingly total destruction. As ecosystems adapt to radioactive environments, societies rebuild from scattered survivors, and new forms of consciousness emerge from the biological chaos left behind by Rick's experiments. These post-apocalyptic worlds often develop greater resilience and adaptability than their pre-disaster civilizations, suggesting that while Rick's presence is catastrophically destructive in the short term, it may also serve as an evolutionary pressure that drives adaptive innovation and development. The children born in post-Rick realities face unique challenges as they grow up in worlds shaped by disasters they did not witness or cause, inheriting both the practical challenges of survival in damaged environments and the psychological burden of knowing that their suffering stems from one individual's casual irresponsibility. These second-generation survivors often develop more sophisticated approaches to technology and social organization than their parents possessed, learning from the mistakes that enabled the original disasters while remaining constantly alert for signs of similar threats. The documentation and preservation of pre-disaster culture becomes an obsessive pursuit for many post-Rick civilizations, as survivors struggle to maintain connections to their lost history while adapting to radically changed circumstances that make their original social structures and cultural practices obsolete or impossible. Museum, archive, and memorial sites dedicated to the world that existed before Rick's arrival serve both as monuments to loss and as inspiration for rebuilding efforts that honor the past while embracing necessary changes. The development of early warning systems and defensive measures against future Rick-like threats becomes a central organizing principle for post-disaster civilizations, as they attempt to create safeguards against interdimensional interference and advanced technological experimentation that could trigger similar catastrophes. These defensive efforts often prove futile against beings with Rick's capabilities, but they serve important psychological functions in helping survivors feel some measure of control over their circumstances. The question of forgiveness and reconciliation becomes particularly complex in realities where Rick occasionally returns to observe the long-term consequences of his actions, as survivors must decide whether to view him as a natural disaster beyond moral judgment or as a conscious being capable of accepting responsibility and making amends for the suffering he has caused. These encounters rarely result in meaningful accountability or genuine attempts at repair, but they do provide opportunities for both Rick and his victims to confront the human cost of cosmic indifference. The formation of interdimensional support networks among survivors of different Rick disasters creates new forms of community and solidarity that transcend the boundaries of individual realities, as beings who have experienced similar traumas find ways to share resources, knowledge, and emotional support across dimensional barriers. These networks operate independently of Rick's awareness or control, representing forms of resistance and recovery that emerge organically from shared experience of victimization. The long-term ecological recovery of Rick-damaged worlds reveals both the resilience of natural systems and their vulnerability to certain forms of technological interference, as some environments successfully adapt to new conditions, while others suffer permanent degradation that prevents the re-establishment of sustainable ecosystems. The factors that determine successful versus failed recovery remain poorly understood, making it difficult to predict which damaged realities might eventually heal and which will remain permanently scarred. The cultural artifacts that emerge from post-disaster civilizations often reflect themes of loss, adaptation, and cautious hope that would be impossible to create without the specific combination of trauma and resilience that characterizes Rick survivor societies. Their art, literature, and music carry emotional resonance and philosophical depth that rivals the greatest achievements of pre-disaster culture, while remaining fundamentally shaped by the experience of rebuilding meaning from the wreckage of everything they once took for granted. As we contemplate these abandoned realities and their struggling inhabitants, we begin to understand that Rick's trail of destruction serves as more than just evidence of his moral failings, but as a testament to the incredible resilience and adaptability of conscious life when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges. The survivors who rebuild their worlds from the ashes of Rick's experiments demonstrate that even the most catastrophic disasters cannot ultimately destroy the human capacity for hope, connection, and the creation of meaning from suffering. In the gentle darkness of approaching sleep, let us hold space for all the beings across infinite realities who have suffered from the casual indifference of those with power enough to reshape worlds but insufficient wisdom to understand the consequences of their actions. Their stories remind us that every choice we make, no matter how small it seems, carries within it the potential to either contribute to suffering or to healing, and that our responsibility to others extends far beyond our ability to fully comprehend or control the ultimate consequences of our decisions. The abandoned realities teach us that while we cannot prevent all disasters or control all outcomes, we can choose to approach our relationships with others and our use of whatever power we possess with humility, compassion, and genuine commitment to minimizing harm, while maximizing the possibility for flourishing and recovery in whatever circumstances we encounter or create. The revelation of Evil Rick's true nature represents one of the most profound betrayals in the multiverse, not because it subverts our expectations about the character, but because it exposes the terrifying vulnerability that exists even among the most intelligent and supposedly self-aware beings when they encounter manipulation, sophisticated enough to exploit their fundamental assumptions about power, control, and identity. Tonight, as we drift through the layers of deception that surrounded this cosmic puppet show, we explore how even gods can be reduced to marionettes when their strings are pulled by hands clever enough to remain invisible until the moment of revelation. The initial appearance of Evil Rick seemed to conform to familiar patterns of interdimensional conflict, presenting itself as simply another variation in the infinite spectrum of Rick possibilities, a version whose moral development had taken a particularly dark turn towards systematic violence and cruelty. His methodical murder of alternate Ricks across multiple dimensions created the kind of existential threat that the Council of Ricks was designed to address, yet his apparent motivations and methods fit comfortably within their understanding of how damaged Ricks might behave when their nihilism and superior capabilities combined with sufficient trauma or psychological instability. The investigation that followed Evil Rick's capture revealed layers of sophistication in both his methods and his psychological profile that should have raised questions about whether a single Rick, regardless of his particular damage or capabilities, could have orchestrated such an elaborate campaign of interdimensional terrorism without assistance or guidance from sources beyond the normal Rick spectrum of intelligence and strategic thinking. Yet the investigators, despite their own considerable abilities, remained trapped within conceptual frameworks that assumed intellectual superiority was synonymous with autonomy and independent action. The torture chamber discovered within Evil Rick's base of operations represented horrors that exceeded even the considerable capacity for cruelty that Ricks had demonstrated across countless dimensions. revealing systematic exploitation and abuse of Mortys on an industrial scale that transformed innocent grandsons into raw materials for experiments that served no apparent scientific or practical purpose. The mechanical precision with which this suffering was organized and maintained suggested not the chaotic brutality of a damaged individual, but the calculated efficiency of someone pursuing specific objectives that transcended simple sadism or revenge. The revelation that evil Morty had been controlling evil Rick through technological manipulation of his brain chemistry and decision-making processes represents perhaps the most sophisticated form of puppet mastery ever achieved, as it required not just the technological capability to override another being's consciousness, but also the strategic intelligence to maintain such control over extended periods while conducting complex interdimensional operations. Without detection, this level of manipulation exceeded anything that normal Morty development should have made possible, suggesting either unprecedented individual evolution or exposure to knowledge and capabilities that no Morty should have been able to access or comprehend. The psychological implications of evil Morty's control over evil Rick extend far beyond the specific horrors of their criminal partnership to encompass fundamental questions about agency, identity, and the nature of consciousness itself when advanced technology can override individual will and decision-making capacity. If a being as intelligent and paranoid as Rick can be reduced to a puppet without his knowledge or consent, then the boundaries between self and other, between autonomous choice and external manipulation, become far more fluid and uncertain than any conscious being should find comfortable to contemplate. The systematic nature of evil Morty's long-term planning reveals strategic thinking that operated on timescales and levels of complexity that exceeded the patience and foresight typically associated with adolescent psychology, suggesting either accelerated intellectual development or access to predictive capabilities that allowed him to anticipate and counter the responses of beings whose intelligence normally enabled them to outmaneuver any conventional opposition. His ability to remain undetected within the Citadel while conducting his campaign of systematic murder indicates manipulation skills that transcended simple technological superiority to encompass profound understanding of Rick's psychology and institutional behavior. The torture and exploitation of Mortys that served as both cover and power source for evil Morty's operations reveals how easily victimization can transform into perpetration when the cycle of abuse is not interrupted by intervention, healing, or the development of alternative responses to trauma and powerlessness. The industrial scale of suffering that evil Morty orchestrated suggests that his transformation from victim to victimizer was not a simple matter of individual psychological damage, but represented a systematic rejection of the empathy and moral constraints that normally prevent even severely traumatized beings from inflicting similar suffering on others. The failure of the Council of Ricks to detect evil Morty's manipulation of their investigation demonstrates how institutional arrogance and assumptions about intellectual hierarchy can create blind spots that persist even when evidence of sophisticated opposition is clearly visible. Their inability to conceive that a Morty could develop capabilities sufficient to deceive and manipulate Rick-level intelligence reflects the same superiority complex that created the central finite curve, showing how even supposedly enlightened beings remain vulnerable to threats they cannot conceptualize or acknowledge. The revelation that intelligence and technological superiority do not guarantee autonomy or protection from manipulation has implications that extend far beyond the specific case of evil Rick to encompass questions about free will, consciousness, and the nature of identity when advanced technology can override or replace individual decision-making processes. If the smartest beings in the universe can be reduced to puppets, then traditional concepts of moral responsibility, personal agency, and authentic choice become far more complex and uncertain than conventional ethical frameworks can adequately address. The question of how many other manipulations remain undetected within Rick's civilization becomes particularly troubling when we consider that evil Morty's success was achieved through a combination of technological capability and psychological insight that other beings within the multiverse might also possess or develop. The possibility that additional puppet masters are conducting their own campaigns of manipulation and control creates a paranoid atmosphere where even the most intelligent beings cannot trust their own perceptions, memories, or decision-making processes. The technological sophistication required to override Rick's consciousness and decision-making capacity while maintaining the appearance of normal autonomous behavior suggests capabilities that exceed conventional understanding of neuroscience, psychology, and consciousness itself. The devices that evil Morty used to control evil Rick operated at levels of precision and subtlety that allowed them to influence complex behaviors and decision-making processes without creating detectable anomalies or triggering the pairs, sophisticated security measures that Rick would normally employ to protect his mental autonomy. The psychological profile that evil Morty developed to enable his manipulation of Rick's psychology reveals understanding of trauma, motivation, and behavioral patterns that exceeds what normal interpersonal experience should provide, suggesting either innate psychological insight or systematic study of Rick behavior across multiple subjects and dimensions. His ability to predict and counter Rick responses during their criminal partnership indicates knowledge of Rick's psychology that was both deeper and more practical than the academic understanding that other beings might develop through observation or analysis. The systematic nature of evil Morty's campaign against the Citadel suggests motivations that transcended simple revenge or personal satisfaction to encompass broader objectives related to the destruction or transformation of Rick, civilization itself. His willingness to torture and kill countless innocent beings in pursuit of these objectives reveals either complete abandonment of normal moral constraints or philosophical frameworks that justify extreme measures in service of goals that he considers sufficiently important to warrant any level of collateral damage. The implications of evil Morty's success for other Rick-Morty relationships across the multiverse create uncertainty and suspicion that poison even healthy partnerships between grandfathers and grandsons who have no connection to evil Morty's campaign. The knowledge that a Morty can develop capabilities sufficient to manipulate and control Rick-level intelligence makes it impossible for Ricks to maintain complete trust in their grandson's apparent helplessness and dependency, while Mortys must wonder whether their own potential for development includes similar capacity for manipulation and control. The revelation that evil Morty had been operating within the Citadel for extended periods while conducting his systematic campaign of murder and torture demonstrates the limitations of even sophisticated surveillance and security systems when they are designed by beings who cannot conceive of threats that exceed their own intellectual capabilities. His ability to maintain his cover while orchestrating complex criminal operations suggests either technological capabilities that exceeded Citadel security measures or institutional incompetence that bordered on willful blindness. The philosophical questions raised by evil Morty's transformation from innocent grandson to cosmic-scale manipulator encompass fundamental issues about the nature of innocence, the inevitability of corruption, and the possibility of redemption for beings who have committed crimes that exceed normal categories of moral judgment. His systematic torture of other Mortys represents not just criminal behavior, but a form of philosophical statement about the nature of suffering, power, and the relationships between victims and victimizers. In systems where traditional moral categories become inadequate for addressing the scope and complexity of the harm inflicted, the legacy of Evil Rick's puppet mastery extends beyond the immediate damage caused by his criminal activities to encompass lasting changes in how beings throughout the multiverse understand the relationship between intelligence, autonomy, between apparent choice and actual freedom, between individual agency and technological manipulation. The knowledge that even the smartest beings can be reduced to puppets creates forms of existential uncertainty that persist long after the immediate threat has been eliminated. As we drift through the implications of this cosmic deception, we begin to understand that Evil Rick's puppet mastery serves as more than just a plot twist or character revelation, but as a profound meditation on the nature of control, manipulation, and the vulnerability that exists within even the most powerful beings when they encounter opposition, sophisticated enough to exploit their fundamental assumptions about reality, identity, and their own autonomy. In the gentle darkness of approaching sleep, let us remember that the revelation of puppet masters hidden behind apparent villains reminds us to question our assumptions about agency, responsibility, and the sources of the harmful behavior we encounter in ourselves and others. The possibility that even our own choices and actions might be influenced by forces we cannot detect or understand should inspire not paranoia, but humility about the complexity of consciousness and the importance of approaching moral judgment with compassion for the possibility that none of us possess the complete autonomy we assume to be the foundation of ethical responsibility. The puppet strings that controlled Evil Rick remind us that true freedom requires not just intelligence or power, but wisdom, self-awareness, and genuine commitment to the kinds of authentic relationships that make manipulation more difficult and healing more possible for all conscious beings who struggle with the burden of choice in an uncertain and often hostile universe. The Smith family serves as the gravitational center around which infinite realities revolve, yet their fundamental dynamics shift and transform across dimensions in ways that reveal both the essential patterns of human connection and the infinite variations that can emerge when familiar relationships encounter different pressures, opportunities, and forms of trauma. Tonight, as we drift through the countless iterations of this archetypal family unit, we explore how love, dysfunction, and the search for meaning persist across realities while taking forms so diverse that they challenge our understanding of what makes a family authentic versus merely convenient. Beth Smith's variations across infinite dimensions reveal the profound impact that individual choices and circumstances can have on personality development and life satisfaction, as we encounter versions of her who have achieved the professional success she craves, others who have embraced the domestic responsibilities she often resents, and still others who have found entirely different paths that transcend the binary choice between career fulfillment and family dedication that constrains her development in the primary timeline. The Beth who becomes a successful surgeon demonstrates confidence and professional satisfaction that seem almost alien compared to the insecure, resentful version we know best. Yet her achievements come at the cost of emotional connections and family relationships that provide meaning and purpose, even when they create stress and disappointment. The dimensions where Beth chooses to abandon her family entirely to pursue adventures with Rick reveal both her potential for growth and discovery and the devastating consequences that such choices have for the children and spouse she leaves behind. These alternate Beths often develop capabilities and experiences that dwarf anything available within domestic life. Yet, they also demonstrate how the pursuit of individual fulfillment at the expense of relational obligations creates forms of damage that persist across generations and affect people who had no voice in the decisions that shaped their circumstances. The question of whether Beth's parental inadequacies stem from inherent personality flaws or from the specific pressures and disappointments of her particular circumstances becomes more complex when we observe versions of her who have developed into nurturing, attentive mothers under different conditions. The Beths who never encountered Rick during their childhood often display greater emotional stability and more sophisticated approaches to parenting, suggesting that her familiar patterns of neglect and emotional unavailability may be responses to her own unresolved trauma rather than fixed aspects of her character. Jerry Smith's spectrum across infinite realities challenges assumptions about competence, masculinity, and the sources of self-worth that define traditional approaches to evaluating success and failure in contemporary society. The dimensions where Jerry achieves professional recognition and financial security reveal capabilities and confidence that seem impossible when compared to his familiar portrayal as ineffectual and parasitic. Yet these successful Jerrys often lack the emotional availability and family dedication that make the unsuccessful Jerry genuinely lovable, despite his obvious limitations. The Jerrys who never married Beth or who maintain their independence from the Smith family dynamics often develop into more confident, capable individuals who retain Jerry's fundamental kindness and desire to help others, while gaining the practical skills and emotional resilience necessary to navigate adult responsibilities without constant support and validation from others. These alternate Jerrys suggest that his familiar helplessness and dependency may be responses to specific relationship dynamics rather than inherent personality traits that define his essential character. The post-apocalyptic Jerry, who thrives in the Cronenberg dimension, demonstrates remarkable adaptability and leadership capabilities that emerge only when external circumstances demand growth and development that normal suburban life never requires or rewards. His transformation into a competent survivor and devoted partner reveals potential that remains dormant in more comfortable circumstances, suggesting that his apparent inadequacy may stem from lack of meaningful challenges rather than genuine incapacity for growth and achievement. Summer Smith's role as the unplanned constant across most realities creates unique psychological pressures that manifest differently depending on how her parents and extended family respond to her existence and development. The dimensions where her unplanned status is treated as a happy accident that enriched family life produce summer variations who display confidence and security that contrast sharply with the defensive, attention-seeking behavior we observe in timelines where her accidental nature is treated as a source of regret or disappointment. The Summers who grow up without Rick's influence often develop along more conventional paths that include healthy peer relationships, academic achievement, and gradual development of independence and self-confidence. Yet, these seemingly healthier versions sometimes lack the resilience and adaptability that come from exposure to cosmic perspectives and extraordinary challenges. The question of whether Rick's influence on Summer is ultimately beneficial or harmful becomes more complex when we consider both the trauma he inflicts and the growth opportunities he provides. The different family dynamics that emerge when Rick's presence is altered or eliminated entirely reveal how profoundly his influence shapes every relationship within the Smith household, often in ways that family members themselves do not recognize or understand. The families where Rick dies early or never appears often develop stronger bonds between parents and children, yet they also miss opportunities for growth and adventure that come from exposure to interdimensional perspectives and cosmic possibilities. The realities where the family successfully resists Rick's influence demonstrate that his dominance is not inevitable, but rather depends on specific vulnerabilities and circumstances that create opportunities for manipulation and control. The families who establish boundaries around Rick's behavior and refuse to enable his more destructive tendencies often maintain healthier relationships with him while preserving their own autonomy and emotional well-being. The question of which relationships within the multiverse are authentic versus convenient replacements becomes particularly complex when family members must decide whether to invest emotionally in versions of their loved ones who share their faces and memories, but who have developed along different trajectories and possess different personality characteristics. The emotional confusion that results from loving someone who is simultaneously familiar and foreign creates psychological stress that no amount of dimensional similarity can completely resolve. The families that successfully integrate Rick's presence into their lives without losing their essential humanity often develop sophisticated approaches to managing his influence that include clear boundaries, mutual support systems, and strategies for maintaining individual identity and autonomy within relationships that could easily become consuming or destructive. These healthy Smith families demonstrate that functional relationships with toxic individuals are possible, but require constant vigilance and mutual commitment to protecting what matters most. The recurring patterns of dysfunction that appear across dimensional variants suggest that certain relationship dynamics persist even when external circumstances change dramatically, indicating that family problems often stem from deeper psychological and emotional patterns that transcend specific situations or individual choices. The Smith family's tendency toward emotional unavailability, poor communication, and avoidance of difficult conversations appears across most realities, suggesting that these patterns represent core aspects of how these individuals relate to intimacy and vulnerability. The realities where family members pursue therapy, counseling, or other forms of professional help reveal both the potential for healing and growth that exists within the Smith family dynamics and the specific obstacles that prevent such healing from occurring in most timelines. The families who successfully address their dysfunction often require external intervention and support that challenges their familiar patterns, while providing tools and frameworks for developing healthier ways of relating to each other. The various forms of trauma and success that different Smith families experience across the multiverse create different pressures and opportunities for growth, bonding, and individual development that shape how family members understand their relationships with each other and their obligations to support or challenge each other during difficult periods. The families who face external threats often develop stronger internal bonds, while those who experience sudden success or windfall benefits sometimes fracture under the pressure of changed circumstances. The children born into Smith families across different realities inherit both the strengths and weaknesses of their parents' relationship patterns, while also possessing the potential to break cycles of dysfunction or perpetuate them into future generations, depending on their individual choices and the support systems available to help them develop healthy approaches to relationships and emotional expression. The question of whether the Smith family represents a fundamentally healthy unit that has been corrupted by specific circumstances and influences, or a fundamentally dysfunctional system that occasionally produces positive outcomes through accident or external intervention, becomes more complex when we observe the full spectrum of their multiversal variations. and the different outcomes that result from different combinations of personalities, circumstances, and choices. The extended family relationships that develop across different realities, including connections to grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, reveal how family dysfunction can either spread across generations and social networks or be contained and healed through the intervention of healthy family members who refuse to participate in or enable destructive patterns of behavior and communication. The Smith families who develop traditions, rituals, and shared activities that create positive memories and strengthen emotional bonds often display greater resilience in the face of external stressors and internal conflicts, suggesting that intentional investment in relationship building and family culture can serve as protective factors against the forces that typically tear families apart or prevent them from developing genuine intimacy and mutual support. The professional help and external support systems that prove most effective in helping Smith families heal and grow typically involve approaches that address both individual psychological development and systemic relationship patterns, recognizing that family dysfunction often requires intervention at multiple levels simultaneously to create lasting change and prevent regression into familiar but unhealthy patterns of interaction. As we drift through the infinite variations of this archetypal family, we begin to understand that the Smith family serves as more than just a collection of characters for interdimensional adventures, but as a mirror that reflects our own struggles with love, connection, dysfunction, and the search for meaning within the relationships that shape our daily existence and long-term development as human beings. In the gentle darkness of approaching sleep, let us remember that every family across infinite realities carries within it both the potential for profound love and connection and the risk of perpetuating cycles of harm and dysfunction that can persist across generations. The Smith family's multiversal variations remind us that healing is always possible but requires conscious commitment to growth, honest communication, and the courage to break patterns that no longer serve the well-being of all family members. The infinite spectrum of their relationships teaches us that authentic love transcends perfect circumstances or ideal personalities, flourishing instead through sustained commitment to treating each other with respect, compassion, and genuine care, even when external pressures and internal conflicts make such treatment difficult or inconvenient to maintain consistently over time. The designation of Rick C-137 as the Rickest Rick and his companion Morty as the Mortiest Morty carries implications that transcend simple character rankings to encompass fundamental questions about identity, authenticity, and the nature of specialness within infinite systems where every possible variation exists somewhere across the vast expanse of dimensional possibility. Tonight, as we drift through the qualities that allegedly make this particular Rick-Morty pairing unique among their countless alternates, we explore whether their cosmic significance stems from genuine exceptionalism or from the simple narrative necessity of having protagonists in a story that could theoretically focus on any pair among infinite options. The characteristics that define Rick C-137 as the Rickest Rick appear to center around his particular combination of scientific brilliance and emotional damage, creating a version of the character who has achieved the highest levels of technological capability while simultaneously suffering the deepest forms of psychological trauma and moral corruption. His tragic origin story, involving the murder of his original family and his subsequent transformation into a multiversal force of destruction and revenge, provides motivational clarity that distinguishes him from other Ricks whose genius may be equivalent, but whose emotional development followed different trajectories with different outcomes. the genius that enables Rick C-137 to manipulate matter and energy at quantum levels, to construct devices that violate fundamental laws of physics, and to understand mathematical relationships that govern the structure of reality itself, represents intellectual achievement that exists at the theoretical limits of what consciousness can accomplish within the constraints of scientific methodology and logical reasoning. Yet this same genius serves as both liberation and prison, providing him with capabilities that approach godhood while simultaneously isolating him from the kinds of authentic human connections that might provide meaning and purpose beyond the pursuit of knowledge and power. Rick C-137's particular brand of nihilism stems not from philosophical inquiry or abstract reasoning, but from direct confrontation with the infinite nature of reality and the recognition that nothing he does ultimately matters because every possible outcome occurs somewhere within the vast scope of dimensional possibility. This experiential nihilism carries emotional weight and psychological authenticity that distinguishes it from the academic nihilism that other intelligent beings might develop through purely intellectual pathways, creating a form of cosmic despair that is both rationally justified and emotionally devastating. The tragic backstory that shapes Rick C-137's character development provides him with clear motivation and psychological coherence that many of his alternates lack, as his transformation from loving family man to interdimensional monster follows a logical progression of cause and effect that makes his current behavior comprehensible, even when it is morally reprehensible. The loss of Diane and Beth serves as the foundational trauma that explains both his emotional detachment and his desperate need for connection, creating internal contradictions that drive character development and relationship dynamics throughout his subsequent adventures. Rick C-137's hunt for Rick Prime represents a form of purpose and direction that distinguishes him from other Ricks who may possess equivalent capabilities but lack comparable motivation for sustained action and long-term planning. His quest for revenge provides narrative structure and emotional investment that transforms what could otherwise be random adventures into components of a larger story about trauma, healing, and the possibility of finding meaning within systems that seem designed to render individual existence insignificant. The designation of the main timeline Morty as the Mortius Morty seems to rest on his particular combination of innocence and resilience, creating a character who retains essential human qualities despite prolonged exposure to cosmic horrors and systematic psychological manipulation that should theoretically destroy his capacity for empathy, wonder, and genuine emotional connection with others. His ability to maintain moral intuition and compassionate responses, while developing practical competence and survival skills, represents a form of character development that balances growth with preservation of core personality traits. Morty's unique relationship with Rick C-137 creates codependency dynamics that transcend the typical grandfather-grandson relationship to encompass elements of mutual rescue, shared trauma, and collaborative survival that bind them together in ways that neither fully understands or acknowledges. Their bond develops through shared experiences that no other beings have encountered, creating forms of intimacy and understanding that exist alongside profound dysfunction and ongoing patterns of manipulation and emotional abuse. The experiences that Rick C-137 and his Morty have shared, including multiple reality abandonments, encounters with alternate versions of themselves, and participation in cosmic-scale conflicts that determine the fate of entire civilizations, have created a shared history and mutual understanding that distinguishes their relationship from other Rick-Morty pairs, who may have similar surface dynamics but lack the specific combination of trauma and growth that characterizes their particular partnership. The question of whether their specialness is real or constructed becomes particularly complex when we consider that their designation as the Rickest and Mortiest may be more a function of narrative focus than genuine exceptionalism, as the act of following their story and investing emotional attention in their development creates the very specialness that supposedly justifies treating them as unique among infinite alternatives. The circular logic of protagonist status suggests that any Rick-Morty pair subjected to equivalent narrative attention might develop similar claims to cosmic significance. Yet their relationship demonstrates qualities that appear genuine rather than artificially constructed, including forms of mutual care and protection that persist despite constant conflict and the ongoing potential for betrayal or abandonment that characterizes most relationships involving Rick-level intelligence and emotional damage. Their ability to maintain connection across multiple reality shifts and dimensional catastrophes suggests resilience and adaptability that exceeds what most partnerships could sustain under similar pressures. The ways that Rick C-137 and his Morty have both grown and corrupted each other reveal the complex dynamics of relationships between beings with vastly different capabilities and moral development, as Rick's influence on Morty's education and worldview creates both opportunities for growth and sources of trauma that will shape Morty's character development for the remainder of his life. Similarly, Morty's influence on Rick provides both emotional grounding and moral challenge that prevents complete descent into nihilistic detachment, while also creating vulnerabilities that Rick's enemies can exploit. Their unique experiences have included participation in the destruction of the central finite curve, encounters with evil Morty and other cosmic-scale threats, and survival of multiple reality collapses that have provided them with perspective and knowledge that most beings within the multiverse never acquire. These shared traumas and achievements create bonds that transcend normal family relationships to encompass something approaching cosmic partnership in the face of forces that exceed individual comprehension or resistance. The burden and privilege of being the main characters in infinite realities creates psychological pressures that no other beings face, as they must somehow maintain individual identity and purpose, while being constantly aware that their significance depends partly on arbitrary narrative focus rather than inherent superiority or cosmic destiny. This meta-awareness adds layers of existential complexity that distinguish their character development from that of alternate versions who exist within their stories without questioning their narrative status. The recognition that other Rick-Morty pairs exist throughout the multiverse who possess equivalent or superior capabilities, deeper emotional connections, or more successful approaches to balancing scientific achievement with human relationships creates ongoing challenges to their sense of specialness and purpose that must be navigated without clear guidelines or external validation of their place. Cosmic significance. Their designation as the Rickest Rick and Mortiest Morty may ultimately represent less a statement about their objective superiority and more a recognition that certain combinations of personality traits, traumatic experiences, and relationship dynamics create particularly compelling examples of broader patterns that exist throughout the multiverse in countless variations and configurations. The responsibility that comes with being viewed as the definitive versions of their character types creates pressure to live up to expectations and maintain consistency with qualities that may be more constructed than inherent, leading to forms of performance, anxiety, and identity confusion that compound the normal challenges of existing within dysfunctional family relationships while possessing godlike technological capabilities. The question of whether their bond represents genuine love and mutual care, or merely psychological dependency, and shared trauma remains open to interpretation, as their relationship combines elements of both healthy connection and destructive codependence in ways that defy simple categorization or moral judgment about whether their partnership ultimately serves their individual development and well-being. As we contemplate what makes this particular Rick and Morty supposedly unique among infinite alternatives, we begin to understand that their specialness may lie not in their superiority to other versions, but in their willingness to continue choosing each other, despite possessing the knowledge and capability to find alternatives that might offer greater comfort, security, or satisfaction. In the gentle darkness of approaching sleep, let us remember that the qualities that make Rick C-137 the Rickest Rick and his Morty the Mortiest Morty may ultimately be less important than their continued commitment to growing together through whatever challenges and opportunities their adventures present, demonstrating that authentic significance comes not from being the best or most extreme version of ourselves, but from remaining open to connection and change within whatever relationships we choose to honor and maintain. Their cosmic journey reminds us that specialness is often created through sustained attention and investment, rather than discovered through comparison and competition, and that the deepest forms of meaning emerge from choosing to love and support each other, not because we are perfect or even particularly remarkable, but because we are willing to continue showing up for each other, regardless of what alternatives might be available in this or any other reality. The return of evil Morty and the revelation of his ultimate plan represents the culmination of every systematic injustice and philosophical horror that has defined Rick's civilization since its inception, as this singular being transforms from hidden puppet master into cosmic liberator, whose methods are so extreme and whose vision so total that his campaign of destruction becomes indistinguishable from an act of multiversal revolution. Tonight, as we drift through the apocalyptic unfolding of his final gambit, we witness how oppression creates its own destroyers, and how even the most brilliant civilizations carry within them the seeds of their own annihilation when they build their foundations upon the systematic exploitation of those they consider inferior. Evil Morty's return to the central narrative comes not as a surprise villain seeking personal revenge, but as the inevitable consequence of systems that have operated for decades without accountability or recognition that their victims possess the intelligence and strategic capability necessary to engineer their complete destruction. His patient accumulation of power within the Citadel represents years of careful positioning and preparation that demonstrates planning horizons and strategic thinking that exceed even Rick-level analytical capabilities, suggesting that his evolution beyond normal Morty limitations has continued far beyond what his previous appearances indicated. The systematic exploitation of Mortys across all realities within the central finite curve becomes visible through Evil Morty's revelations as an industrial operation of staggering scope and casual cruelty, transforming innocent grandsons into raw materials for the energy production that powers the dimensional barrier, imprisoning infinite realities within Rick's carefully curated multiverse. The golden fluid that enables the central finite curve's continued existence is revealed to be concentrated suffering extracted from beings whose only crime was existing in realities where their grandfathers possessed the intelligence and narcissism necessary to justify their systematic torture and exploitation. The infrastructure that supports this multiversal atrocity reveals technological sophistication that exceeds even the most impressive Rick achievements in other areas, as the machinery of oppression operates with efficiency and scale that transform individual cruelty into cosmic horror. The processing facilities that convert Morty consciousness into usable energy represent engineering achievements that would be magnificent if they served any purpose other than the perpetuation of systematic torture, demonstrating how advanced capabilities become monstrous when they are applied toward the service of fundamentally immoral objectives. Evil Morty's moral argument against the entire Rick-dominated system within the central finite curve transcends simple revenge or personal grievance to encompass philosophical criticism that challenges the fundamental assumptions underlying Rick's civilization and its claims to superiority, enlightenment, or justified authority over other forms of consciousness. His recognition that the central finite curve represents a prison designed to protect Rick's ego rather than serve any broader good provides moral clarity that justifies extreme measures in pursuit of liberation for all beings trapped within its artificial boundaries. The revelation that every Rick within the curve has participated in or benefited from this systematic oppression eliminates the possibility of innocent bystanders or reformed individuals who might deserve mercy or consideration during the collapse of their civilization. Evil Morty's wholesale condemnation of Rick culture reflects understanding that individual exceptions do not absolve collective responsibility for institutional horrors that persist across generations and affect countless victims who never had opportunities to consent to or resist their being. Exploitation. The destruction of the Citadel proceeds with mechanical precision that reflects both Evil Morty's technological superiority and his complete abandonment of the empathy and moral constraints that normally prevent intelligent beings from pursuing objectives that require mass murder and the elimination of entire civilizations. His willingness to sacrifice countless innocent lives in pursuit of liberation for the oppressed demonstrates how prolonged exposure to systematic abuse can corrupt even the most fundamentally decent personalities when they finally acquire sufficient power to pursue justice through violence. The mass murder of Ricks that accompanies the Citadel's destruction serves multiple purposes beyond simple elimination of potential threats, as it represents both practical removal of beings capable of rebuilding oppressive systems and symbolic rejection of the intellectual superiority and moral authority that Rick civilization used to justify its exploitation of other forms of consciousness. The industrial scale of Rick extermination mirrors the industrial scale of Morty exploitation, creating a form of poetic justice that balances the cosmic scales through equivalent suffering inflicted upon former oppressors. The breaking of the central finite curve requires not just the destruction of its physical infrastructure, but the elimination of the power sources and control systems that have maintained the dimensional barrier for decades, necessitating the sacrifice of countless Mortys whose suffering has powered the system and whose continued existence would enable its reconstruction. Evil Morty's decision to end their torment through death, rather than liberation, reflects either practical necessity or philosophical commitment to ensuring that the instruments of oppression cannot be repurposed for future exploitation. The collapse of Rick's civilization proceeds with catastrophic speed that reflects both the interconnected nature of Citadel society and the systematic vulnerabilities that Evil Morty has identified and exploited through his years of careful observation and preparation. The technological dependencies and social structures that enabled Rick dominance become liabilities when turned against their creators, demonstrating how advanced civilizations often become more fragile rather than more resilient as their complexity and interdependence increase beyond manageable levels. Evil Morty's escape to the true infinite multiverse beyond the central finite curve represents not just personal liberation but symbolic victory over the forces that have constrained and defined existence for countless beings across infinite realities. Yet his departure also abandons the survivors of Rick's civilization to face the consequences of collapse without guidance or leadership from the being whose actions precipitated their current crisis. His refusal to take responsibility for rebuilding or healing reveals how liberation and destruction can become indistinguishable when pursued by beings who have been damaged beyond the possibility of genuine care for others. The aftermath of the central finite curve's destruction leaves scattered survivors across infinite realities that no longer conform to the carefully controlled parameters that have defined their existence since the barrier's construction, forcing them to confront forms of challenge and possibility that their civilization was specifically designed to avoid encountering. The Ricks who survive the collapse must face the terrifying prospect of existing in realities where their intellectual superiority is not guaranteed, and their technological advantages may prove inadequate against beings whose capabilities exceed their own. The philosophical implications of evil Morty's successful revolution extend beyond the immediate destruction of Rick civilization to encompass fundamental questions about justice, liberation, and the methods that oppressed beings may legitimately employ when seeking freedom from systematic exploitation and abuse. His extreme measures force observers to confront uncomfortable questions about whether gradual reform is possible within systems built on foundational injustice, and whether violent revolution becomes morally necessary when peaceful alternatives have been systematically eliminated. The question of whether evil Morty's actions represent justice or terrorism becomes particularly complex when we consider both the scope of the oppression he sought to end and the scale of the destruction he employed as his method of liberation, suggesting that traditional moral categories may be inadequate for evaluating actions that operate on cosmic scales and affect beings whose capabilities transcend normal human limitations and moral frameworks. The liberation that evil Morty achieves through his destruction of the central finite curve creates new forms of freedom and possibility for infinite beings who had been trapped within Rick's artificial multiverse. Yet it also eliminates the stability and security that the barrier provided for beings who had adapted their existence to the constraints and opportunities available within the carefully controlled system that evil Morty destroyed. The technological capabilities that evil Morty demonstrates during his final campaign suggest that his evolution beyond normal Morty limitations has continued far beyond what previous appearances indicated, raising questions about the ultimate extent of his abilities and whether his escape to the broader multiverse represents the end of his involvement in Rick-related conflicts, or merely the beginning of a larger campaign with objectives that transcend the liberation of beings trapped within the central finite curve. The survival of Rick C-137 and his Morty through the collapse of their civilization forces them to confront the possibility that their relationship and adventures may no longer be sustainable without the technological infrastructure and dimensional stability that Rick's civilization provided, creating new challenges for their continued partnership and forcing them to develop new approaches to survival and meaning-making that do not depend on easy access to infinite alternatives and resources. Evil Morty's final words before departing for the broader multiverse serve as both explanation for his actions and warning about the corrupting influence of Rick-dominated systems on everyone who remains within them for extended periods, suggesting that his transformation from victim to destroyer represents a predictable outcome rather than an exceptional case when beings with sufficient capability decide that systematic oppression requires systematic response. The recognition that evil Morty's success was achieved through the application of Rick-level strategic thinking and technological capability to the systematic elimination of Rick civilization demonstrates that the intellectual superiority and moral flexibility that enabled Rick dominance could also enable its destruction when applied by beings whose motivations transcended the narcissistic goals that typically constrain Rick behavior and decision-making processes. As we drift through the apocalyptic conclusion of Evil Morty's campaign and contemplate its implications for the survivors and the broader multiverse beyond the collapsed central finite curve, we begin to understand that his revolution represents more than just the end of one form of oppression, but a fundamental challenge to systems of power and authority that claim legitimacy through superiority rather than consent and service, to the genuine well-being of all affected beings. In the gentle darkness of approaching sleep, let us remember that Evil Morty's extreme measures serve as a warning about what happens when systematic oppression persists long enough to create beings capable of responding with equivalent systematic destruction, reminding us that justice delayed and reform refused often lead to forms of liberation that no one involved finds satisfactory or sustainable in the long term. His escape to infinite possibility reminds us that even the most constrained and damaged beings retain the potential for transcendence and transformation. Yet his methods also demonstrate how liberation achieved through violence and destruction carries within it the risk of perpetuating cycles of harm that extend far beyond the immediate objectives of revolutionary action and affect innocent beings who bear no responsibility for the injustices that motivated such extreme responses. The collapse of the central finite curve and the destruction of interdimensional travel infrastructure creates a fundamentally different reality for Rick C. 137 and his family, forcing them to confront forms of limitation and vulnerability that they have not experienced since Rick first introduced portal technology into their lives decades earlier. Tonight, as we drift through this new phase of existence where infinite escape routes have been replaced by the necessity of commitment to a single reality, we explore how the loss of godlike mobility transforms relationships, priorities, and the very nature of what it means to find meaning within the constraints of ordinary existence. The immediate aftermath of losing easy interdimensional travel reveals how profoundly Rick's identity and sense of purpose have been built around his ability to transcend normal limitations through technological superiority and dimensional manipulation. Without access to infinite realities where every problem has already been solved, and every resource is available somewhere across the multiverse, Rick must confront the possibility that his legendary status as the smartest man in the universe may not be sufficient to address challenges that require patience, emotional intelligence, or genuine cooperation with others, rather than simply finding a dimension where those challenges do not exist. The psychological impact of being confined to a single reality after years of casual reality hopping creates forms of existential claustrophobia that affect not just Rick, but every member of the Smith family who has grown accustomed to viewing their current circumstances as temporary and replaceable, rather than permanent conditions requiring investment and commitment. The knowledge that their problems cannot be solved through dimensional abandonment forces them to develop new approaches to conflict resolution, relationship building, and personal growth that depend on working through difficulties rather than avoiding them through escape. Rick's confrontation with his own mortality and limitations takes on new urgency when he no longer possesses the option of replacing himself with alternate versions or extending his existence indefinitely through access to advanced medical technology from more sophisticated realities. The finite nature of his remaining time and the irreversible consequences of his choices create pressure for genuine self-reflection and relationship repair that his previous God mode existence made unnecessary and psychologically avoidable. The family dynamics that emerge when Rick loses his status as the most capable problem solver and adventure provider reveal both the genuine affection that has developed beneath years of dysfunction and manipulation and the extent to which relationships have been built on Rick's ability to provide extraordinary experiences and solutions rather than ordinary emotional support and consistent presence. Without portal gun adventures to structure their interactions, Rick and Morty must discover whether their bond can survive the transition to normal grandfather-grandson activities and more conventional forms of shared experience. The practical challenges of living within a single reality without access to advanced technology or infinite resources force the Smith family to develop skills and capabilities that Rick's presence has previously made unnecessary, including basic home maintenance, financial planning, conflict resolution, and the kinds of mundane problem-solving that most families master through necessity, but that the Smiths have avoided through Rick's technological interventions and dimensional escape options. The question of whether Rick can find meaning and purpose without his role as protector and guide through interdimensional adventures becomes central to his psychological survival in a post-curve reality, as his identity has been so thoroughly built around his exceptional capabilities that normal human existence threatens to render him obsolete and purposeless. The transition from cosmic significance to domestic irrelevance represents a form of ego death that challenges Rick's most fundamental assumptions about his own worth and place in the universe. The possibility of encountering beings smarter than Rick creates anxiety and anticipation that he has successfully avoided throughout his adult life by constructing the central finite curve, specifically to prevent such encounters. Yet, the destruction of that barrier means that contact with superior intelligences becomes not just possible but statistically inevitable given sufficient time and exploration. Rick's preparation for such encounters reveals both his intellectual curiosity about what lies beyond his current understanding and his deep terror of discovering that his achievements are insignificant compared to what truly advanced beings have accomplished. The new threats and opportunities that exist in an uncurated multiverse include forms of danger that Rick's experience within the controlled environment of the central finite curve has not prepared him to recognize or address, as well as possibilities for growth and discovery that were systematically excluded from his previous sphere of operation. The random nature of these encounters eliminates Rick's ability to predict and control outcomes through superior knowledge and planning, forcing him to develop genuine adaptability and resilience rather than relying on predetermined advantages. The search for Rick Prime takes on different meaning and urgency in a reality where dimensional travel is limited and dangerous, transforming what was once a manageable hunt through accessible realities into a potentially lifelong quest that may require Rick to develop new technologies, form alliances with other survivors, and accept help from beings he would previously have dismissed as intellectually inferior. The practical constraints of the search force Rick to prioritize his objectives and make choices about resource allocation that reveal what truly matters to him beyond the abstract pursuit of revenge. How other survivors of the curve collapse adapt to their new circumstances provides Rick with examples and cautionary tales about different approaches to post-apocalyptic existence. As some former Citadel residents attempt to rebuild Rick's civilization while others embrace the opportunity to develop entirely new forms of society and individual purpose. These varied responses demonstrate the range of possible futures available to beings who must recreate their identities and objectives within fundamentally altered circumstances. The technological challenges of developing new forms of interdimensional travel or communication without access to the infrastructure and resources that previously supported such capabilities force Rick to approach familiar problems from entirely different angles, potentially leading to innovations and discoveries that would have been impossible within the constrained environment of the central finite curve, where certain solutions and approaches were guaranteed to be available. The potential for genuine growth and development that emerges when infinite alternatives are no longer available creates opportunities for Rick to invest emotionally and intellectually in specific relationships, projects, and goals without the constant knowledge that better options exist elsewhere. This forced commitment to particular circumstances and people may enable forms of satisfaction and meaning that were impossible when every choice could be easily reversed or replaced through dimensional travel. The development of local community connections and responsibilities that Rick has previously avoided through his ability to remain detached from any particular reality becomes necessary for long-term survival and psychological health. In a post-curve existence where cooperation and mutual support replace technological superiority as the primary means of addressing challenges and achieving objectives, Rick's integration into normal social structures represents a fundamental shift in how he relates to other people and understands his role within larger systems of mutual obligation and support. The question of whether Rick's family relationships can deepen and improve when they are no longer overshadowed by the constant possibility of dimensional escape creates both hope and anxiety for family members who have grown accustomed to Rick's emotional unavailability and casual dismissal of their concerns as temporary problems that can be avoided rather than permanent aspects of existence that require genuine engagement and long-term commitment to address successfully. The educational and developmental opportunities that become available to Morty when his adventures are no longer structured around Rick's psychological needs and scientific interests allow him to pursue forms of learning and growth that reflect his own curiosities and capabilities rather than serving as components in Rick's ongoing projects or expressions of Rick's desire for companionship during dangerous interdimensional activities. The possibility that Rick's scientific work might finally serve constructive rather than destructive purposes emerges when his capabilities are no longer distorted by easy access to infinite resources and the knowledge that any mistakes or failures can be corrected through dimensional travel to realities where different choices were made. The necessity of living with consequences creates incentives for more careful consideration of the long-term implications of scientific research and technological development. The philosophical questions that arise when Rick must choose specific goals and commit to particular relationships without the safety net of infinite alternatives force him to confront fundamental issues about value, meaning, and the criteria for making choices when every decision carries permanent consequences that cannot be easily undone through technological intervention or dimensional escape. The new forms of vulnerability and interdependence that characterize post-curve existence create opportunities for Rick to experience types of human connection and mutual support that were impossible when his technological superiority made him essentially independent of other people's capabilities, knowledge, and emotional resources. The discovery that he needs others in practical as well as emotional ways may enable relationships based on genuine reciprocity rather than the one-sided dynamics that have characterized most of his previous interactions. As we contemplate Rick's adjustment to life after the collapse of the system that has defined his existence for decades, we begin to understand that the loss of infinite possibilities may paradoxically create space for forms of meaning and satisfaction that were impossible when every choice could be easily reversed and every relationship could be conveniently replaced with more attractive alternatives from other dimensions. In the gentle darkness of approaching sleep, let us remember that the end of Rick's God mode existence represents not just loss and limitation, but opportunity for growth and connection that requires commitment to particular circumstances and people rather than constant searching for perfect alternatives that may not actually exist, even within infinite possibility. The collapse of the central finite curve reminds us that meaning often emerges from our willingness to invest deeply in whatever reality we inhabit, rather than from our ability to escape to better alternatives when our current situation becomes challenging or disappointing. The new phase of Rick's existence suggests that authentic satisfaction may require us to develop genuine appreciation for limitation, commitment, and the kinds of ordinary human experiences that become precious precisely because they cannot be infinitely replicated or easily replaced when they become difficult or imperfect. The philosophical implications of existence within an infinite multiverse penetrate every aspect of human experience and challenge fundamental assumptions about choice, responsibility, meaning, and the nature of individual significance in ways that transform how conscious beings understand their relationships with themselves, others, and the vast cosmos that contains infinite variations of every possible experience. Tonight, as we drift through the deepest questions raised by Rick and Morty's multiversal framework, we explore how awareness of infinite realities changes not just what we think about existence, but how we approach the daily act of living within whatever particular configuration of circumstances we happen to inhabit. The paradox of choice within infinite possibility creates psychological tensions that exceed the normal human capacity for decision-making and moral reasoning, as every action taken carries the knowledge that infinite alternatives exist, where different choices were made with different consequences and different outcomes for all affected parties. When every possible decision exists somewhere across the multiverse, the traditional frameworks for evaluating right and wrong, success and failure, wisdom and foolishness become inadequate for providing guidance about how to live or what choices deserve our commitment and investment. The question of responsibility becomes profoundly complex when individuals possess knowledge that their actions will be balanced by infinite alternatives, where different choices were made by other versions of themselves, creating philosophical problems that transcend conventional ethical systems built on assumptions of scarcity, uniqueness, and the permanent consequences of individual decisions. If infinite versions of yourself make every possible choice, what moral weight can any particular decision carry? And how does individual accountability survive the knowledge that all possible outcomes occur regardless of your specific contribution? The concept of individual significance faces systematic challenge from multiversal awareness, as the recognition that infinite versions of every person exist across infinite realities makes it difficult to maintain traditional beliefs about the special nature or irreplaceable value of any particular individual or relationship. When everyone you love exists in infinite variations across infinite dimensions, the specific version you happen to encounter in your particular reality becomes simultaneously precious as your only direct experience and trivial as one arbitrary selection from infinite possibilities. Yet, this same infinite multiplication of possibilities creates its own forms of meaning and significance that transcend traditional approaches to understanding value and importance, as the recognition that every possible experience occurs somewhere transforms existence into a vast exploration of consciousness itself, rather than a singular journey with unique outcomes that can be permanently lost or achieved. The infinite nature of possibility means that every moment of joy, love, connection, and discovery exists eternally somewhere across the multiverse, creating forms of cosmic permanence that transcend individual mortality and the temporary nature of specific experiences. The relationship between cosmic insignificance and human meaning reveals itself as more complex than simple opposition, as the knowledge that nothing ultimately matters, because everything ultimately happens, can paradoxically liberate individuals to find authentic sources of purpose and satisfaction within their particular circumstances, rather than seeking validation through comparison with others or achievement of objectively important goals that transcend personal preference and individual commitment to specific values and relationships. The search for authentic connection becomes more challenging and more precious when individuals understand that infinite alternatives exist for every relationship they might choose to pursue or maintain, as the knowledge that better partners, friends, and family members exist somewhere across infinite realities makes it difficult to invest fully in the particular relationships available within any single dimension. Yet this same knowledge can deepen appreciation for the specific individuals who happen to share your reality by highlighting the statistical miracle of any particular configuration of personalities and circumstances that enables meaningful connection. Love takes on different qualities and significance when it exists within multiversal context, as the recognition that infinite variations of every beloved person exist across infinite realities challenges traditional concepts of uniqueness and irreplaceability, while simultaneously emphasizing the preciousness of the particular version you happen to encounter and choose to care about. The love that persists despite knowledge of infinite alternatives becomes more rather than less meaningful, as it represents conscious choice to value particular relationships over theoretically superior options. The nature of mortality and loss transforms when death and separation are understood as dimensional rather than absolute phenomena, as the knowledge that deceased loved ones continue to exist in infinite variations across infinite realities provides forms of comfort and continuity that traditional approaches to grief and mourning cannot offer. Yet this same knowledge can complicate the natural processes of healing and acceptance by creating hope for reunion or replacement that prevents the emotional resolution necessary for moving forward within current circumstances. Growth and development face unique challenges within multiversal frameworks, as the knowledge that infinite versions of yourself exist who have made different choices and achieved different outcomes can undermine motivation for personal change and self-improvement by providing easy rationalization that better versions of yourself already exist somewhere else. The discipline and commitment required for authentic development become more difficult when infinite alternatives seem to eliminate the necessity of working through challenges within your particular reality. The question of whether genuine choice exists when all possible decisions are made by various versions of yourself across infinite realities creates philosophical problems that challenge basic assumptions about free will, moral responsibility, and the nature of consciousness itself. If every possible choice occurs somewhere, then individual decisions become less about creating unique outcomes and more about selecting which particular stream of possibility you choose to inhabit and experience directly. The pursuit of knowledge and understanding takes on cosmic dimensions when researchers realize that every possible discovery exists somewhere across infinite realities, making scientific advancement less about uncovering new truths and more about accessing information that already exists in dimensions where different historical developments led to different accumulated knowledge and technological capabilities. This recognition can both inspire and discourage intellectual effort depending on whether individuals focus on the infinite nature of remaining mysteries or the infinite existence of potential solutions. The relationship between individual agency and cosmic determinism becomes paradoxical within multiversal contexts, as the existence of infinite realities where every possible choice is made seems to suggest that outcomes are predetermined by the mathematical necessity of infinite possibility, while simultaneously requiring individual consciousness to make specific decisions about which particular version of infinite experience to inhabit and identify with as authentic personal existence. The concepts of justice and fairness must be reconsidered when traditional notions of reward and punishment become complicated by the knowledge that infinite versions of every person experience every possible outcome across infinite realities, making individual suffering simultaneously tragic as direct experience and trivial as one data point within infinite variation. The desire for cosmic justice becomes both more urgent and more obviously impossible when injustice is balanced by infinite justice elsewhere. The meaning of progress and achievement faces fundamental challenge when all possible developments and accomplishments exist somewhere across infinite realities, transforming individual and collective efforts from attempts to create unique value toward participation in the eternal exploration of possibility that encompasses every conceivable form of success and failure. The motivation for improvement and innovation must be redefined when perfect solutions already exist in dimensions where different choices led to different developments. The nature of hope and despair transforms within multiversal contexts as the knowledge that infinite realities contain infinite variations of every possible outcome provides both ultimate comfort that every dream can be realized somewhere and ultimate frustration that individual effort may be unnecessary when better alternatives already exist elsewhere. The balance between these competing implications determines whether multiversal awareness leads to liberation or paralysis. The question of what constitutes authentic existence becomes central when individuals must choose how much to invest emotionally and practically in their particular reality versus maintaining awareness of infinite alternatives that might offer superior experiences or more attractive circumstances. The temptation to view current existence as temporary or provisional must be balanced against the necessity of full engagement with whatever reality you happen to inhabit. The pursuit of happiness and fulfillment requires new approaches when traditional sources of satisfaction become complicated by knowledge that infinite versions of yourself across infinite realities experience every possible degree of contentment and misery, making individual emotional states simultaneously important as direct experience and insignificant as temporary fluctuations within infinite possibility. The cultivation of appreciation and gratitude becomes both more essential and more challenging when infinite alternatives exist. The responsibility that conscious beings bear toward each other transcends traditional interpersonal ethics to encompass questions about obligations across dimensional boundaries and the moral weight of choices that affect not just local individuals, but infinite variations of those same beings across infinite realities. The scope of potential consequence and connection becomes so vast that conventional moral reasoning becomes inadequate for addressing the full implications of multiversal awareness. As we drift through these profound philosophical questions raised by existence within infinite possibility, we begin to understand that multiversal awareness serves not as an answer to the fundamental questions of existence, but as a lens that reveals how much deeper and more complex those questions become when we attempt to understand consciousness, choice, and meaning within the context of infinite reality, rather than the limited frameworks that conventional human experience provides. In the gentle darkness of approaching sleep, let us remember that while knowledge of infinite realities may complicate traditional approaches to finding meaning and purpose, It also reveals that the search for understanding and connection is itself infinite, providing endless opportunities for discovery and growth that transcend any particular answers we might temporarily achieve, or beliefs we might temporarily hold about the nature of existence and our place within it. The infinite multiverse reminds us that meaning emerges not from achieving final understanding or perfect circumstances, but from our continued willingness to engage fully with whatever reality we inhabit, while remaining open to the vast mystery that surrounds and encompasses every possible form of experience and consciousness across infinite dimensions of possibility and wonder. As we drift toward the end of our journey through infinite realities, remember that in some dimension you're already asleep, dreaming peacefully of adventures yet to come. Somewhere else you're just beginning to understand the vast scope of existence, while in another reality you've always known these truths. The multiverse of Rick and Morty reminds us that while infinite possibilities can seem overwhelming, they also mean infinite chances for love, growth, and connection. Even Rick, the most brilliant and broken man across all realities, finds meaning in the simple act of caring for his family. So as you close your eyes tonight, know that across infinite dimensions, infinite versions of peace await you. Some realities where problems never existed, others where they've all been solved, and countless more where, like now, you're simply drifting into gentle sleep, held by the knowledge that in the vast cosmic ocean of possibility, you are both infinitely small and infinitely precious. Sweet dreams across all realities, traveler. Everything, everywhere, is going to be okay.